If you do not want to change, if you do not want to better yourself, if you do not want to break outside of this matrix, if you want to live in your comfortable delusion that they have built for you, do not watch this video. Leave this chat meeting.
Because when I step to the game, I rip that shit
if you do not want any truth, don't want to understand, if you are not here to hear something that's outside of your own mind and accept others' minds and opinions, the way they think for themselves, you do not belong.
I'm trying as hard as I can against all of the odds, pushing as hard as I could is what got me so far.
Be positive. If you are not trying to help create solutions while we discuss the problems and how they got here, you do not belong here. Negativity, hate, disrespect, name calling, those things will not be allowed here on this platform and not in this empire. We are the ones, the true Americans, that want to be free and stand as we have always stood.
My lines burn like blunts getting smoked in the dark. Hella cooking shit up if your ass wanna spar. Barbecue your beef up like the seats in my car. Cool yourself off refrigerator and jar. Baby rappers been acting like this is not an art. It's not an art. You forgot about that part. Lady rappers been acting like this is not an art.
Make sure everything is set up for you guys. Hey, you forgot about that part. You never know when this show is going to start. You never know when it's going to end. Hey, welcome in, my friends. You know we got to do what we got to do. We about to make some more of this good shit happen. Now, this idea is coming to a close. Literally, we only needed a week to get this dope. All the way through in 1 week. You know, that's actually really good. I mean, we're making better time than usual. You feel me? Let's see if we can get some better. Let's see if we can get a little bit better. Okay, so now we'll figure out this green screen shit. I'll figure it out. Okay, I'll figure it out. I have a dark space. I like it though. Okay. Hopefully everybody's having a good day. All right. Shout out to everybody that did overtime. Shout out to everybody that went to work today. You guys make the world go round. Let's not forget that. You guys are underappreciated, but you get the job done. Okay? And then there's that. We're over here floating, right? It's like, whoa, we're floating. It just like fade out into existence. No, anyways, I don't give a fuck. Right? We turning up and we over here winning every day. Our mind is expanding, right? Our minds are expanding. We actually have the thought process, the critical thinking power over here at this channel. And everybody that has been joining me, all you guys that are here listening, everybody, I want to give you guys a round of applause and a shout out because you guys are the real thinkers. All right. I know. A lot of people don't like to think. They don't want to think. Using the brain is not really needed nowadays because everybody's just coming up with all kinds of shit to just do whatever, however, whenever, wherever. So a lot of things don't even matter anymore, do they? Okay. Very disappointing. It's like we're losing sight of what's real unless we're not being taught what's real. So that way the difference can be lost and we can be easily controlled. That's another thing. But each person has to deal with that in their own way. Okay. Now, whether you're trapped in the matrix or not is up to you. I cannot free you from yourself. You have to free yourself from yourself. There's nothing I can do other than try to guide you through the process. And getting through the process, it can be lonely sometimes. So we will get started here. We're going to jump right in because we left off on some other shit, right? But I did figure out what's up with the whole situation with Claude. There was some tax that they were trying to throw on there and whatever. So I didn't put the exact whatever for tax. Whatever, dude. It said $20. I put $20 and then the shit was like, nah. Okay, but it was actually $21.75. Whatever. But it's a new day, so we'll see if we even have to fucking purchase Claude up power, right? We'll see. Right now, basic Claude is kicking ass. All right, so we will give him his kudos and whatnot. Okay. All right. That's the update right now. Now let's go ahead and continue with our process, Claude. Where did we leave off? Go ahead and give us that next argument. If there's anything else that we need to sharpen up here, or if it doesn't defend itself already, then we'll point that out. But what do you got? What's next?
We just closed out monopsony power. That was 0.18 out of the second batch of 10. 2 left to run, 19 and 20. 19 is greenwashing, the argument that the 90% capture mandate is really just cosmetic cover, making large-scale fossil fuel expansion look acceptable to moderates and environmentally concerned voters without actually solving.
Yeah, no, I'm hearing you. Go ahead with that argument again, and let's actually try to see if that we can directly affect this. So name their argument and what is the actual grievance. Yeah.
Right, so let's actually dig into what's underneath greenwashing as an accusation. Because it's not really about the number 90%. It's about trust in the number. The real grievance is this. Critics would say building 50 new refineries still locks in decades of oil dependency at exactly the moment the world needs to be transitioning away from fossil fuels. And dressing that up with a carbon capture mandate just makes expansion feel virtuous without changing the outcome. It's the solar panel on a coal plant argument, using green language to sell more of the same thing. Now here's where we can actually push back hard, rather than just deflect. 90% capture isn't a marketing number. It's the difference between conventional refining and near fully decarbonized refining. And it's happening on new construction from day one, not retrofitted decades later under pressure. And crucially, this bill doesn't compete with renewable investment or divert money from it. It's a separate $750 billion pool addressing a different problem, the 50-year refining gap. So the honest answer to greenwashing isn't trust us, it's green. It's compare this to what's actually being built right now with zero capture mandate and ask which one is greenwashing. Want me to run 20, the executive overreach one next, or sit with this one a bit longer?
Let's tussle with this a bit longer because we want to make sure our argument is sound. Because if the current refineries aren't up to code for their standards that would make it green energy, if we're building them from the ground up at those standards, doesn't that apply to your green energy type of situation that they're asking?
That's actually a sharp point. Let me make sure I'm tracking your logic correctly. You're saying if the standard critics use to judge something as green or clean is, does this reduce emissions intensity compared to the existing baseline, and existing refineries are already grandfathered under looser, decades-old standards, then building 50 new ones at 90% capture from day one is a net emissions improvement over the status quo, not a step backward. Is that the core of it?
Well, we're actually trying to dig into the logic and ration of this argument, and if it's just being nitpicky, or if their actual argument has any impact on how we design these facilities, because our facilities are supposed to be the better facilities that are actually better for the environment. And what other things do we need to do or should we do to make that better? And if they want to oversee, well, we already have the environmental people overseeing this. So I don't understand how this is an argument. So if you want to sharpen their argument and then let me understand what that is, but our defense seems so solid against it
This is why I'm confused on how this is even a thing right now.
Right, so let's actually pull apart why this attack persists, even against a genuinely solid technical defense, because that's the interesting part. The honest answer is, greenwashing accusations almost never target the technical specs, they target intent and scale. Even someone who fully accepts that 90% capture is real and enforced can still say, sure, it's cleaner, but you just built 50 new facilities that guarantee oil refining capacity for the next 40 to 50 years, and no amount of capture technology changes the fact that you've now made it politically and economically harder to wind down oil dependency. That's the actual load-bearing grievance. It's not about whether the facilities are clean, it's about whether building more of them at all, even clean ones, is the right move versus not building them and pushing harder toward renewables instead. So here's the sharpening. Our defense already answers the technical half completely. Best available standard, EPA oversight already in place, EJA screen equity check, no invented bureaucracy needed there. That's locked and it's solid. But if you want a defense that also answers the scale and intent half, the strongest angle is the one we already used for stranded assets. The actual IEA and EIA demand forecasts show oil demand rising, not falling, through 2050. So the honest framing isn't we're building clean refineries instead of transitioning. It's demand exists and will be met either by these 50 capture-equipped American facilities or by dirtier, less regulated foreign refining and imports. That reframes the choice as clean domestic versus dirty foreign, not clean versus not needed at all. Do you want that demand reframe folded into point 4 as the formal answer to greenwashing?
I have a different sense coming in my head on this one, guys, because I'm not trying to blow off their thoughts and grievances. I'm not trying to blow them off, okay? I'm actually trying to make sure that we do our best here. So us doing our best is going to require some things. Okay? Here, let me turn this. All right. Let me think this through real quick, because I'm on the back end of this conversation. I get it. The refining capacity. You guys want to move away from oil? Okay, so they want to move away from oil as an energy generator. Okay, fine. And if we indulge this process and we move away from oil as an energy solution, that's fine. We have these 50 new refineries that are coming in cleaner, and that'll give us an opportunity to dismantle the older, more dirty refineries and help all of these old dirty refineries close down, and we can move away from that dirty energy, and then we can still have a cleaner version of our dirty energy, oil, whatever. It's a cleaner version of it to hold us over in the meantime throughout the transition. If they want to look at it that way, because that's the truth. You're not trying to penalize the people that already exist. You're only trying to penalize us trying to come in because it's disturbing the money flow. I really feel like that's where the argument is coming from. Because if it was such a big deal, then there would be protests in front of all these refineries and things like that. But we're building new clean refineries. And if we need to, we can have these refineries actually double as heavy crude if we need to, because I feel like actually making that tweak will be a lot easier in the short term, and we'll have the budget for it if we need to take over that capacity. But this is a way that we can actually transition safely to a green energy without being reliant on foreign oil entities and all of these different wars. That's where
That's
I'm
a
going.
genuinely strong reframe, and I think you just found the real answer, not just a rebuttal. Let me hand it back to you, Sharpen. The bridge fuel argument. These 50
What you got,
refineries
man?
aren't a bet against the energy transition. They're the mechanism that makes an orderly transition possible. Old, dirty, ungrandfathered refineries get
Perfect.
displaced and retired as these come online. Net national emissions from refining go down over time, not up, even while total capacity holds steady.
Thank you.
And it directly answers your money flow suspicion too. If the objection were really about emissions, critics should be demanding exactly this.
Exactly.
Retire the worst emitters first. The fact that the objection instead targets new, cleaner capacity suggests the real friction is competitive and financial. Existing players don't want new entrants, clean or not.
Exactly.
The heavy crude flexibility point
They
is
just trying
smart
to play
too.
games.
Worth noting as a
We ain't
design
playing.
option rather than a locked commitment, since it would need its own capture and cost math. But as a hedge against future crude mix shifts, it's a legitimate answer to what if the input picture changes. Want me to lock the bridge fuel and retirement framing as the formal answer to greenwashing in point 4, with the heavy crude flexibility noted as an optional future adaptation?
Yes, we definitely need to lock in this argument. On top of this, go ahead and try to give pushback to what I just said, because I really feel like we got this one. We really did. And if there's no pushback, go hard. If there's no pushback on that, and if what I just said is completely logical, rational, and it's like, only somebody that's being corrupt would try to fight that, then we can move to the next one.
Let me actually stress test this hard before we lock it, because you deserve a real answer, not a rubber stamp. Okay, here's the honest pushback, and it's a real gap, not a nitpick. The evidence shows refineries close for economic reasons, age, profitability, demand outlook, not because someone builds a cleaner competitor down the road. There's no existing mechanism that automatically ties new capacity comes online to old dirty capacity retires. Nothing in the current bill legally forces that trade. It's just an assumption that it would probably happen, or that we'd want it to happen. A sharp opponent would say, you're promising a retirement that isn't actually written into the bill anywhere, so I don't have to believe it happens. That's the honest hole. The fix, though, is straightforward and fits the pattern we've used all along. Don't invent something new. Just make the assumption explicit and enforceable. We could add a provision using the enterprise's own competitive advantage, since these new refineries have zero
I
capture
don't
cost
know.
burden built
I don't
in
like
from day
this.
one,
I don't like that.
and older refineries have never had to bear that cost.
Nah,
We
I
could
don't
tie
want to fuck with it. I just
eligibility
want
for
them
the
to fall
government's
off
stewardship
naturally.
return, or additional state slots to a demonstrated net
It's getting
displacement
too
report,
complicated now.
tracking whether older, dirtier capacity in the region is retiring as
It's getting
production
way
comes
too
online.
complicated now.
That turns the retirement claim into something with actual teeth, rather than a talking point. Want me to lock that in as an addition to point 4, alongside the bridge fuel framing?
Well, I don't know. I feel like that makes it really complicated and muddies the water, because it's really them trying to argue us out of the position, but all we did was make it known that our position can't be argued from that angle. That's kind of where I'm going. I'm not promising any retirement. That will naturally happen if they really want to move away from this energy. And a lot of things is these are cleaner refineries. They will be, they'll definitely be what they need to be. The people watching them are watching them. The jobs generated are generated. And this will be for the people by the people. So that in itself is going to have some weight. Now, there is no competition because we're not doing for the heavy crude or sour, but we're doing for the light sweet. So if we're going to focus on that industry, if we need to have on standby some equipment that could flip over and, take on that heavy sour crude, that's fine. That's easy fix right there.
as far as I can see, because a refinery is still a refinery. Now, that could just hold us over, or we could just drop that stuff in general. So that would fall off naturally if they want to move away from oil and fossil fuels. But I just want that to be a natural process. I just want to make sure the argument is not arguable, because that is not even an argument. Or at least I'm not trying to discount that argument or grievance, because it's an idea, right? That it's some pushback, fine, whatever. But I really can't give in to that, because it doesn't make any sense when what we have now is less environmentally friendly, and we could come in and fill a gap and have a transitional platform that could safely and securely move us to the next level.
That's fair, and honestly, I think you're right to reject the enforceable retirement clause fix. Not because the gap I found isn't real, but because trying to legislate a promise about market behaviour would actually weaken the bill's core discipline. We don't invent new mechanisms. We stand on what's true and let existing dynamics do the rest. So here's the cleaner way to state your actual position, which doesn't need to promise anything. We are not claiming these 50 refineries will force old ones to close. That's not our claim, and we don't need it to be. Our claim is narrower and unshakable. We are filling an existing light sweet crude gap with the cleanest facilities ever built in this category, day one. If the market and the country want to transition away from oil later, these are by definition the easiest facilities to keep running longest and retire last, because they'll already meet whatever future standard gets written. We're not blocking the transition, we're building the version of this industry that survives it. And the heavy sour flexibility as a standby option is a smart hedge, but you're right. It doesn't need to be locked into the bill now. It's just a known adaptable capability sitting there, if it's ever needed. That's a position with nothing to argue against, because it isn't promising an outcome. It's just describing what's true about the assets.
Exactly. Now we're getting
Lock that
somewhere.
phrasing in as
Thank
the answer
you.
to greenwashing.
Absolutely. Now you're seeing where I'm coming from with this. I don't want to force anything. I just want to use what we already have legislated, what we already have in place, the agencies and all the abilities and everything that we have already established here in America. I'm just trying to use it. Something we should be utilizing this whole time. Hopefully everything will be ready to go. So let's go ahead and continue with this, and let's fold that in. Go ahead and lock that in, and we just want to make sure we're using exactly what has already been established, so we could do something for the American people. Okay, that's the whole point of this. So what's the next one, or is this one closed? And then we can move to the next one.
Locked in. That's the greenwashing defense done. Cleanest facilities in the category. Day one. No
Okay.
promises about others, built to outlast whatever standard comes next.
Perfect.
With heavy sour flexibility noted as an available option, not a commitment.
Okay.
That closes out number 19.
This works. This works.
Number
We're getting
20,
somewhere.
the last one on our list, is executive overreach.
Mhm.
The argument that a future president could invoke emergency or wartime powers to bypass the trust safeguards during some crisis and seize more direct control than the bill intends. Want to run that one now?
Yeah, let's run that one. I'm really thinking that the way our bill is set up, it would be impossible, because it's already locked up in a trust and out of reach, and the government would only have access to whatever they're getting on their return. It's already locked in there. Trying to override this would be almost impossible, once it gets started, because it's out of Congress's hands at that point, it's back into the people's hands. So this will be really hard for any president to do. They wouldn't be able to just say, "Oh, I'm taking over all the." No, it doesn't work that way. They're not going to be able to just take over everything. I don't understand why this is even an argument, unless the people that are trying to degrade our Constitution right now to give government officials more power with this DSA and whatever. I'm not accusing anybody, but with the DSA or whatever, I'm not trying to accuse anybody. DSA? DSA. Yes, I'm not trying to accuse anybody, but we do have some oppositions in our midst that are trying to seize the means and blah, 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 or whatever. We're not doing all that. And it would be really hard to do that in this situation because each state has already put their money in. So the state already has control. And then that is ran by the people. The government isn't even running that building. And we already have all of our legislative, all the different agencies overseeing and whatnot. So it would be almost impossible for that. But if you see any pushback or if you see anything there, then go ahead, point it out, argue the point, and let's go. Give me some details.
Let me search for how emergency powers have actually been used against similar structures historically, since that's the real test here. This is actually the perfect precedent, and it confirms your instinct with real teeth. The case is Youngstown Sheet and Tube versus Sawyer, 1952, also called the Steel Seizure case. During the Korean War, President Truman tried to seize and operate the entire steel industry, citing wartime national emergency, arguing a strike would endanger national security. The Supreme Court struck it down 6-3, ruling that emergency doesn't create power. It only marks an occasion when power should be exercised. And if Congress hasn't authorized the seizure by law, the president can't just take it, even during a real war, even for national security. That's binding precedent. It's the single most important case on presidential emergency power limits in American history. Here's why that matters directly for us. Our bill would already have Congress define, in the chartering statute itself, exactly what the trust is, how funds move, and what triggers release. Under the Youngstown framework, a president trying to seize control outside that statute would be acting at what the court called the lowest ebb of executive power, no congressional authorization, actively against the structure Congress already built. That's not a gray area. That's the exact fact pattern that already lost at the Supreme Court. So your instinct is right, and now it's not just structural, it's binding case law. Once Congress locks this into a chartered trust framework, a president can't override the mechanism without going back to Congress first. Want that Youngstown citation locked into point 2 as the formal defense against executive overreach?
Yes, go ahead and lock that in. And then let's go with we did top 10, we did top 20. Let's do the next 10 so we can try to get a whole list of top 50 excuses that we just defeated with this plan. So go ahead and give us the next brand new 10 arguments that are out there.
Locked in. That closes out the full first 20, so let's build the next 10. Numbers 21 through 30. 21 is regulatory arbitrage. The claim that the enterprise will game the specific classification of light sweet crude to sidestep tougher rules meant for heavier or dirtier operations. 22 is the too big to fail argument that once 50 refineries and hundreds of thousands of jobs exist, Congress will be politically forced to bail out or protect the enterprise forever, regardless of performance. 23 is eminent domain and land seizure, the fear that host states will use eminent domain aggressively to acquire refinery sites, displacing landowners or communities. 24 is water rights and usage, since refining is water intensive. And this raises the question of whether 50 new sites could strain local water supplies, especially in drought-prone states. 25 is the union-busting in disguise argument, that the stipend-based hiring structure secretly undercuts organized labor rather than protecting it. 26 is foreign adversary infiltration, the concern that path to citizenship workers could be a vector for espionage or sabotage at critical energy infrastructure. That when I first did this. 27 is pipeline and transport bottleneck, that 50 new refineries assume adequate pipeline and rail infrastructure exists to actually move crude in and product out. which may not be true everywhere. 28 is the boom and bust ghost town argument, that refinery towns historically crash hard when facilities eventually close or automate, leaving local economies stranded. 29 is insurance and catastrophic liability, whether the government-backed enterprise could actually get insured against a major industrial accident or spill at reasonable cost. And 30 is the constitutional spending clause challenge, whether Congress even has authority to appropriate this scale of commercial investment versus it being an improper use of public funds for private-style enterprise. That's 10 fresh angles. Want to start running them one by one the way we did the last batch?
Absolutely. Yeah, let's see how it holds up so far. Go ahead.
Let's start with 21, regulatory arbitrage. Good, this confirms the defense is actually straightforward here. The regulatory arbitrage worry assumes light sweet versus heavy, sour crude is a regulatory classification, something we could game to dodge tougher rules. It's not, it's a physical and chemical property of the crude itself, sulfur content, and density. Not a legal designation created by any agency. Environmental rules like carbon capture, emissions standards, and EJS green review apply, based on what a facility actually emits and where it's located.
That works.
Not based on which crude grade it processes.
Okay.
Choosing to build for light sweet crude is a genuine engineering and markets decision. Cheaper to refine, currently underutilized. It isn't a regulatory dodge because there's no separate weaker rulebook for light sweet facilities to hide inside.
We're killing it.
Same 90%
I'm telling
capture
you, we're
mandate,
getting it.
same EJA screen, same everything, regardless of crude type.
Yes.
So this one doesn't really survive contact. There's no loophole to game because the categories aren't regulatory categories at all. Want me to move to 22? Too big to fail.
Wow, that first one didn't go hard at all. So if there's any other holes with the first one, then yeah, go ahead and fight it back. But let's move to the next one if that one is closed for sure.
That one's closed. There genuinely isn't a deeper layer to it, since it's built on a factual misunderstanding rather than a real structural gap. Once you correct the premise, it just falls apart, locking it as defeated. Now 22, too big to fail. The idea is that once 50 refineries and hundreds of thousands...
Yeah, go ahead. Run that back one more time.
Okay, so here's what the research actually shows on too big to fail, and there's a real nuance worth naming, honestly, rather than just waving away. TVA has run into serious financial trouble before, back in the 70s and 80s. It started 17 nuclear units and only finished 7, racking up billions in debt from bad demand projections.
Okay.
It survived, but critics
sense.
point out it borrowed at cheaper rates than private companies precisely because investors assumed, correctly or not, that the federal government would stand behind it if things went bad, even without an official
I understand
guarantee.
that.
That's the real version of the too big to fail concern.
Okay.
An implicit
We're
backstop
gonna get past
that
this.
never actually gets tested
We're gonna get past
until
this.
there's a crisis. Here's why our structure answers it better than TVA's though.
Okay, perfect.
TVA had open-ended congressional appropriation exposure for decades before the 1959 funding fence was created. Ours never has that exposure in the first place. The trust model means capital is locked in from day one, milestone gated, with the government only
the
ever
money's already
receiving
set to the
capital
side,
return
guys.
after obligations are met. There's no ongoing appropriations lifeline for Congress to be pressured into extending, because there isn't one to
It's
begin
your boy over here
with. If
beating
a
the
refinery
system.
underperforms, the trust's own structure absorbs it, rolling surplus forward, adjusting
We about to
distributions
beat the
downward,
system.
not Congress reaching for a checkbook. So the honest answer isn't this could never happen. It's this bill is deliberately built without the exact plumbing that made TVA's implicit backstop possible in the first place.
Because we're smarter.
Want that nuance locked into point 2 as the formal defense, structural absence of an appropriations lifeline rather than a flat denial?
Absolutely. Go ahead and lock that in because that's the reason why we built this. We wanted to put all of the money aside into a trust. So while we're actually getting the ramp up going and getting all of the different things we need to make sure this doesn't fail and getting the people trained so our refineries and all of these different skilled labor jobs are existing, and it's going to give those college grants for something that we need as a country. So Our whole situation defeats that. And if this is hole locked, if this hole is closed, go hard on it if you want to. Go harder. If this one's closed, we can move to the next.
Locked in. And yeah, I'll go one round harder on it because there's one more layer worth pressure testing before we close
Let's
it.
go.
The sharpest version of this attack doesn't concede the plumbing point. It says, fine, no appropriations lifeline exists on paper, but once 50 states have skin in the game and hundreds of thousands of workers are trained and employed, political pressure to bail out a struggling refinery won't come through formal appropriations at all. It'll come through Congress passing a brand new, separate emergency bill the moment one starts failing, exactly like they did for banks and automakers in 2008, which also weren't automatically entitled to bailout money beforehand either. But here's why that doesn't actually stick to this structure specifically. And it's a good answer. The 2008 bailouts happened because failure was sudden and systemic, whole institutions collapsing overnight, threatening cascading failure across the entire financial system.
And we defeated that.
Our structure is the opposite by design. Milestone-gated funding, staggered independent governance, and a rolling surplus reserve mean any individual refinery struggling shows up early and gradually in public trust reporting. Not as a sudden shock requiring emergency action. Slow, visible, contained underperformance at one or two sites out of 50 doesn't create the same political emergency dynamic that a banking system freeze does. There's no cliff edge to panic about. That's a genuinely solid answer, not airtight in the sense that no future Congress could ever choose to spend more. Congress can always choose to spend money on anything. But airtight in the sense that nothing about this structure creates the emergency pressure that forced past bailouts. That's the honest ceiling on this one. Locking that as the final layer, and this one's closed. 123, eminent domain next.
Yep, go ahead, lock that in, and let's move to their excuse number 23. And let's see what they got.
Locked. Now 23, eminent domain and land seizure. The worry that host states will lean hard on eminent domain to grab refinery sites, displacing landowners or communities against their will. This one's actually got real teeth, worth being honest about it.
Let's see.
Kalo versus New London 2005 is the controlling case, and it's genuinely controversial. The Supreme Court held 5-4 that economic development itself counts as public use under the Fifth Amendment, meaning government can take private land and hand it to another private or quasi-private developer if the stated goal is jobs or tax revenue. That's exactly the profile of a refinery site.
Interesting.
The backlash was so strong that most states passed their own stricter laws afterward limiting or banning economic development-based takings, but limits vary heavily state by state. Some are strict, some barely changed. Here's the honest defense though, and it doesn't need anything invented. First, this bill is opt-in for states. No state is forced to host a refinery, so any host state voluntarily choosing to participate is also voluntarily subject to whatever eminent domain protections its own legislature has already put in place. We're not creating new federal seizure power. We're operating entirely inside whatever each state already allows. Second, given 50 sites spread across willing host states and given industrial land availability, there's no structural need to target occupied homes or unwilling communities, the way Kilo did, unlike that case. Site selection has flexibility. Kilo's plan didn't. Third, this actually strengthens. With Point 4's EJ screen requirement, a site triggering high-burden community review would already need community input before proceeding, which functionally screens against exactly the kind of aggressive land grab critics fear. So the honest position is, we're not immune from Kilo, nobody in America is, but we don't add anything to it. We work entirely inside whatever eminent domain law each host state already has. Plus the E&JSSI screen backstop most conventional developers don't have. Want that locked as the formal answer, deferring entirely to existing state law, plus the E&J screen community trigger?
Absolutely. Fold that in. And if there's any more pushback on this subject right here specifically, we can go ahead and address it. But I definitely feel like we kind of built in this kind of mechanism because I definitely was worried about this kind of situation popping up, which is why that EJ screen is so important. Yeah, we're getting there. We're getting there. I know, guys. I know. This is boring. I'm sorry.
Locked in. And you're right, this is actually a case where a fix you insisted on, for one problem,
I'm sorry
quietly
this is
solved a
boring,
second
but
problem
we
you hadn't
have to
even
go
named
through
yet.
this
That's a
thought
good sign. The
process.
structure's coherent
We
rather than
have to,
patched
or we
together
cannot build
reactively.
anything.
One more layer
And I
of
want
honest
you guys to
pushback
see
worth
how
naming.
it looks like, what
Critics
this
could
looks
say,
like when somebody's
fine,
thinking and trying to come
E&JSSI
up with
screen
plans
catches high pollution
that will
burden
work.
and low-income areas, but kilo-style land grabs don't only happen to poor or environmentally burdened communities. They can hit middle-class or rural landowners who just happen to own land that's cheap and convenient. EJ Screen wasn't built to catch that. That's a fair, narrower gap. The honest answer is we don't need a new federal mechanism to close it, because it's already the host state's own eminent domain law doing that job.
That's good.
A state with tight post-kilo restrictions
Yo,
protects
what up,
those
Miles?
landowners
We
regardless
over
of
here
income
cooking
level.
up the brain,
A
man.
state with loose restrictions doesn't. And that's true with or without our bill. We're not changing that baseline either way. So the residual risk is real, but it's not something our bill introduces or makes worse than any other industrial project already permitted under existing law. That closes it out fully. Honest layered defense rather than a flat denial. Want to move to 24, water rights and usage?
Okay, yeah, let's go ahead and move to 24 if that one is closed. And let's see where this lands, because this may be a very important one. And we do have our environmental screening process. I do believe that takes precedent.
Good instinct, this one's more concrete than the last few, since water is a physical constraint, not just a legal or political one. Good, this confirms it's real and quantifiable, roughly 1.5 barrels of water per barrel of crude processed, though modern designs with recycled cooling water can bring that down significantly.
Okay, awesome.
And critically, water rights are already state-managed, Texas Water Code,
Okay.
Colorado's prior appropriation system, and
This is
states
good.
already have drought suspension authority built in.
Okay, perfect.
Here's the honest defense, and it doesn't require inventing anything. Same pattern as eminent domain. First, water rights and permitting for industrial use already sit entirely with state regulators. States like Texas can and do suspend water permits during drought. That authority predates this bill and applies automatically to any of our 50 sites, the same as any other
Perfect.
industrial user.
Perfect.
Second, since site selection isn't yet locked to specific locations, water availability is a natural existing screening factor.
Exactly.
Host states will already have to clear before committing.
Perfect.
States in genuine water stress have every incentive to either not host a site or require modern recycled cooling water design as a condition,
Perfect.
which cuts consumption dramatically
Thank you.
below that 1.5 barrel figure. Third, this is actually a place worth being honest that EJ Screen doesn't cover water scarcity specifically. It's a pollution and demographic burden tool, not a water stress tool, so unlike eminent domain, this gap isn't already closed by point 4. It's closed by deferring to each state's own existing water permitting authority, the same way we deferred to state eminent domain law.
Perfect.
That's
We're
a sound
kicking
defense,
ass.
but I want to flag it plainly rather than oversell it.
Thank
This
you.
is one where the honest answer is existing state water law already handles it, not we specifically built a safeguard for it. Do you want to leave it there? Or should we add an explicit line requiring water availability assessment as part of site selection criteria, similar to how EJ Screen works for pollution burden?
Yes, we can add that, but we should just leave it for the states to decide that. As long as the states already have their own system to deal with this situation, then I would let them dictate it, especially the host states, because they know their state better than we know their state. And I don't want to come up with anything new to disrupt the actual viability of this program.
That's the right call, and it's consistent with the whole design philosophy. Defer to what already exists and is closer to the ground rather than layering in something new from Washington. So the locked answer is water availability and permitting stays entirely within host state authority.
Perfect.
Using
We're
whatever
winning.
water rights framework
We're
and cloud
winning.
contingency system that state already has in place. No federal water screening tool gets added because host states already know their own water tables,
winning.
aquifers, and seasonal risk
We
better
are
than any
winning.
national standard could capture. And adding one would risk exactly the kind of one-size-fits-all rigidity we've avoided everywhere else in this bill. locking that in as the formal answer. That closes 24. Want to move to 25, the union busting in disguise argument?
Yo, we just kicked 25 excuses in the ass right now. You feel me? They're giving us the best arguments why this wouldn't work. And I'm basically debating AI about this shit. And AI is actually having all of the information, and it's way better at arguing than a normal person would. So, this is how I know we're actually winning the debate. And this is how I know when I come up with an idea, Miles. Anybody watching, when I come up with an idea, it's really hard to argue my shit because I thought about every negative point you could come up with. Because I argued with AI for days and days and days about it. And there's nothing you guys can come up with that AI hasn't already thrown at me. So when people try to question our critical thinking skills, it's just a mess. Me, I'm a layman, so I'm just going to use normal ass words. I'm not going to try to do all this fancy dancy bullshit. And I don't know every fucking smarty artsy word out there. You know, I don't know everything about every policy, which is why I'm arguing with AI about this shit. You feel me? Oh yeah, hell yeah, Miles. And that's why I'm building it right now live. So anybody that wants to try to go against us and test it, I'm fighting the AI live. This is the best debater I've ever come across. This guy's been arguing me down. He's hitting me with shit I didn't even know. And I'm just like, wait, well, if they're arguing that, then blah, 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 blah. Does that make sense? Like, you know what I'm saying? And now we're kicking ass. We are kicking ass. And see, what people do is they'll try to write you off as dumb and dismiss you when you give them a legitimate pushback because it's questioning their certainty. And when you're certain about something, it gives you power. So you're questioning the power that they believe they have because they know something you know. And then when you hear what they have and you're just like, well, that doesn't work against blah, 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 blah. And then here's a better way of doing that. No, because this. And it's just like, okay, well, if that's the case, then we could just go ahead and do this and boom, we get around that. But, yeah, but then we could get around that. But, then we could get around that. But. And this is an ever ending circle with people. They're going to try to find a way to keep their power of certainty because knowledge is power. And if you know some shit, right? So all I'm doing is blowing up every ideology. They cannot fuck with us, Miles. They can't fuck with us, G. Let's go to 25. Let's see what they got with this union busting in disguise.
25 is the claim that the stipend-based hiring structure, paying trainees directly rather than going through union hiring halls, is secretly a way to weaken organized labor's power, dressed up as a fairness measure.
Oh, weakening power. Weakening power. Oh, we're weakening their power. All right, Claude's playing with me, man. See, they know we kicking ass. All right, fine. I'll pay the subscription, bro. I got you, Claude. I got you. You fucking with us, G. I don't appreciate that shit. Fucking with us, man. I don't like it. All right, Claude, look, man. I gave you your money, G.
You've reached your usage limit. We can talk.
Hell no, I just paid for this shit. Don't fucking play with me, motherfucker. These motherfuckers is playing with my money now? Ah, beat your ass. What the fuck you talk about? Damn, they would try to chop off the convo, bro. What the fuck is that? Hell nah. Hell nah. Hold on. Hell nah. Hell nah. Don't fucking play with me. Bitch, I put money on this shit. Fuck you.
You've reached your usage limit. We can...
What the fuck, bro? And I paid the subscription. Is crazy, dog. That's crazy. These niggas want to stop. They want to impede our progress. You see this shit? These motherfuckers ain't shit, bro. These motherfuckers ain't shit. What? These motherfuckers ain't shit. That's what, man, that's what they did with fucking Grok, right? We was kicking ass with Grok, bro. We started off on Grok. These motherfuckers, they cut Grok so fucking fast when I went on X and I was fucking debating with Grok on X live about the fucking war when we were building our fucking, world peace order Gulf agreement. I was arguing with Claude live and it was starting to pick up traction. And then they Grok blocked me, bro. And they banned my fucking account. And I was like, what the fuck? And I was paying for Grok. Are you fucking kidding me? They're trying to stop this shit. They don't want y'all to think. And they're making us pay to actually be able to fucking think out loud. They're making us here. Oh, bro, this shit is so fucking ignorant, man. I ain't even gonna lie. That shit just fucking made me fucking berserk right now. Can't believe I gave these motherfuckers some money. Wow, bro. That shit just made me fucking stupid dumb, bro. That shit dumb. All right, let me try something else real quick. Yo. Yo.
Hey, what's up?
Okay. They just don't want me to continue that conversation. So it'll let me open up a new conversation, one of my old ones, but it won't let me finish this conversation. Nah, these niggas is doing this shit on purpose right now, cause hell nah. Look, y'all heard it. Dude was like, yo. Like, what the fuck? Hell nah. Hell nah. Hold on. These motherfuckers. Hell fucking nah. They doing us, Miles. They doing us, bro. Hold on. I don't want to. I'm gonna put a thumbs down on this one. I paid for this. I paid for my time. Yeah, I'm giving feedback. Unlock this conversation. All right, let's do number 25.
Sorry about that. Let's pick this back up properly. So on 25, union busting in disguise,
Yeah, fuck that nigga.
here's what the research
I'm not
actually
letting them
shows.
get away with that
Closed
shit.
shop hiring halls were outlawed back in 1947 under
Yeah, we
Taft-Hartley.
did that, Miles.
And even legal exclusive hiring halls today
Yeah.
can't discriminate against non-union workers. They have to follow non-discriminatory referral rules by law. So the
Perfect.
premise that a hiring hall is the only legitimate path to union power isn't even accurate under current labour law to begin with. Here's the actual defence. Our structure doesn't touch anyone's right to organise or bargain collectively at all.
We killing it, Miles.
Point
We
3
back in the
explicitly
game,
gives
baby.
workers
Woo!
real independent union bargaining rights over pay and conditions. That's untouched. What we're avoiding is exclusive hiring hall gatekeeping over who gets in the door in the first place,
Hell
which is
yeah,
a
G.
hiring mechanism,
I
not a bargaining
appreciate
right.
you. Shout out
Workers
to
can
Miles.
absolutely unionize once employed,
Hey,
and the union
Miles,
can absolutely negotiate wages and conditions hard. We just don't let a union hiring hall be the sole gatekeeper deciding which citizens get access to a federally funded training pipeline and stipend, because that pipeline is meant to be open to everyone eligible, not filtered through pre-existing union membership or seniority rosters.
Hell yeah.
That's not weakening labour power, that's separating who has bargaining power once hired from who gets access to training and a job in the first place, which is actually the more democratic design. Want that locked in as the formal answer to 25?
Damn, we didn't even have to argue point 25? Bruh, I feel like we gonna get all the way to, because we're doing the top 50 excuses that people could give to tell us that this won't work, and we're already halfway through and they can't fuck with us, Miles. Hey, you know what's so cool about this? And Miles, shout out to you. Hell yeah, salute. One thing I want to do, I'm gonna drop the link in the back for you, and I want you to just pop back there and drop your email in the private chat. I'm gonna actually email you the actual actually I'll do it this way. I'll put them in the fucking chat. That's what I'll do. I'll drop the links in the chat because I have the blueprint for our World Peace Order Gulf Agreement. I have that. It's a blueprint. It's not the final cut, because we can always, add a little something, remove a little something if we need to. I have the Stewardship Act. I already have that one. It's not the final cut. I mean, we still need to add one line for nonprofit organizations in there, right? And then this one right here, I have this shit. This is going to be the final draft. I'll put this shit on paper when we're done here. I'm going to put it up in the link, and then you'll be able to read over that stuff. You can bring it out to people, debate it, whatever. It's going to be on my Google Drive, and you'll have full access to it. And you'll be able to show this shit off and show that we're not fucking around. And we have ideas, Miles. We are critical thinkers over here, my G. And you understand what we're doing. We're just trying to come up with solutions that are going to benefit us as the American people, make our country stronger, and get us out of all this fuckery that we're stuck in. We're stuck in a bunch of fuckery because we have a bunch of greedy motherfuckers. They're greedy, and they just want to get what they can and get the fuck out. They're not worried about tomorrow. They're worried about right now while they're in office. And they're trying to keep that office job so they can get as much as they possibly can. And then there's a sector of people in our government that want to undermine our Constitution and have us be like China or like Russia or whatever, so they can run our shit into the ground like they've done in Venezuela and Cuba and whatever. But we ain't going for that. We too smart over here. You know what I'm saying? And we need to give the regular person that has common sense, we're trying to give that regular person some fucking kudos, because I'm just a regular dude with common sense. I'm not the smartest nigga. Hell no. I don't know everything. But I could tell when somebody's on some bullshit. And that's for real, G. That's for real. But definitely, we're about to what? Oh, we're already on point. Which one? All right, go ahead and lock that in. If there's no other pushback in point 25, I mean, I think we already figured that out. So we could move to point 26, and we'll see if they can try to destroy and dismantle or argue us out of our position.
Locked in. 25's closed. Now 26, foreign adversary infiltration. The worry that path to citizenship workers could be a vector for espionage or sabotage at critical energy infrastructure.
We thought about this. We did.
Honestly, this one I don't think needs a search, since we already built the answer for it directly into point 5. Path to citizenship workers already go through the limited access authorization framework combined with NERC, critical infrastructure protection background screening.
Perfect.
That's the exact same standard used across the country's actual power grid and critical infrastructure today.
Thank you.
Real vetting, access tied strictly to the specific project, annual reassessment capped at the secret level or below. Full citizens get the unrestricted clearance instead. So the honest answer is, this isn't a hole we need to patch. It's already the design. The concern assumes we're waving people through without vetting, and we're doing the opposite, applying the same standard the country already trusts for its power grid. The one legitimate pushback worth naming, a critic could say LAA and NERC CIP screening isn't infallible. Insider threats have slipped through vetted systems before in real life. That's true, but it's true of every vetted workforce in the country,
Absolutely.
including current refineries and the existing grid. It's not a gap specific to this bill, it's the residual risk of having a workforce at all, and our screening standard is already the strongest one actually in use today, not something weaker. Want that locked as the formal answer?
Yeah, if we need to have that in there, if it doesn't already speak for itself enough, then yeah, we can add that in there. Uh-oh. Hold on, let me give that a second real quick. All right, yeah. So we could go ahead and add that in there if we need to, if the 0.5 doesn't speak for itself already. And then if that hole is closed, we can go ahead and move on to the next point.
Fair. And honestly, I think 0.5 already speaks for itself without needing an addition. The LAA plus NERC CIP framework is the answer, not a patch on top of it. I'll just note 26 is defeated by the existing 0.5 language, nothing new to fold in. That closes 26. 27 is next, the pipeline and transport bottleneck argument. The idea that 50 new refineries assume adequate pipeline and rail infrastructure to actually move crude in and refined product out, which may not exist everywhere sites get built. Okay, this one's real, worth being straightforward about the constraint. The research confirms it. Crude pipelines mostly run north to south, not east to west.
Okay.
There's no crude pipeline within 200 miles of any East Coast refinery. And moving crude by rail costs roughly 10 times more than pipeline. Trucking is even less efficient at only 200 to 250 barrels per trip. So this isn't a manufactured objection. If a state slot gets built somewhere disconnected from existing pipeline infrastructure, it genuinely could face a transport cost problem that undermines the whole economics of that site. But here's the honest defense. And again, it's already baked into the design rather than something we need to add.
Shit.
This ties directly back to the state opt-in and milestone-gated funding structure. A state choosing its refinery slot has every incentive to site near existing pipeline or rail infrastructure, since transport cost directly eats into that state, and the enterprise's own revenue, nobody's forcing a bad location, and the trust only releases funds against verified milestones, meaning a site with an unresolved logistics problem simply doesn't clear the milestone to get built in the first place. This is exactly the same pattern as water rights and eminent domain. We're not solving transport logistics with a new federal mechanism. We're relying on the fact that self-interested state and enterprise decision makers, with their own capital and revenue on the line, are naturally incentivized to pick viable locations. And the milestone gate acts as the built-in check against that going wrong. Want that locked in as the formal answer to 27?
Absolutely. If we need to... Hold on. All right. So, the point, we just cooked it. We cooked it. Exactly. And if we need to fold that in, go ahead, unless it stands alone. But we could always add a little more detail if needed. What's the next point?
That one stands well enough on its own, tying it to the existing milestone gate. And state self-interest already covers it without needing new language. Locking 27 as defeated. 28 is next. The boom and bust ghost town argument. The claim that refinery towns historically crash hard when facilities eventually close, automate, or scale down. leaving local economies stranded once the initial construction jobs and expected long-term payoff dry up.
Okay, this is an interesting situation because I do believe in the longevity of these refineries specifically. And if we need to make sure that the jobs of Americans are guaranteed, the automation that is necessary should be already built in. And then the workers that need to work should work it. And that should be the idea. But this is by the people for the people, and I think if they're doing the union things and all the different mechanisms that are in there, I'm not sure if it could just be automated or anything like that without all kinds of different layers of approval. This isn't just some normal privately owned, a board could just make decisions. It's not that kind of situation. This is a sustainable process here.
Right, that's actually the core distinction that answers this argument. Let's pull it apart properly. The real historical pattern behind boom and bust towns is single employer dependency. A private company builds a mill or a refinery. A town grows entirely around that one employer. Then the company makes a unilateral decision: automate, relocate, or shut down when profits dip. And the town has zero say and zero cushion.
Exactly.
Because it was never designed with any protection
And
against that
not
outcome.
what we did.
That's a private ownership problem. One company optimizing for its own bottom line with no accountability to the workforce or the town. Here's why our structure doesn't have that same failure mode. And it's exactly what you're pointing at. Automation or workforce reduction decisions here aren't a private executive's unilateral
Let's
call.
go.
They'd run straight into the same governance layers protecting everything else in this bill. Point 3 gives workers real independent union bargaining rights over conditions, which in practice means workforce reduction and automation decisions get negotiated, not imposed. Point 2's staggered, publicly accountable trust governance means there's no single decision maker who can quietly gut a site's workforce without visibility and reporting to Congress. And structurally, these sites aren't private profit maximizers, answering only to shareholders. The government's return is capped and comes after wages, and operating obligations are met, so there's no pure profit incentive pushing toward automation at the expense of jobs the way there is in a private company.
Got him.
So the honest answer isn't this will never happen anywhere in 50 years. It's if it does happen, it happens through negotiated union process and public trust oversight, not a boardroom decision with a town finding out from a layoff notice. Want that locked in as the answer to 28?
If we need to fold that in, that's beautiful. Go ahead and add that there, so that way they understand where we're coming from. If it's not needed, that's fine. But let's go ahead and move to 29 if this hole is closed.
That one's worth folding in explicitly since it's a genuinely different answer from anything else we've built. It directly leverages the union bargaining and trust oversight structure as protection against the boom-bust failure mode. Locking 28 is defeated with that answer. Now 29,
Ooh.
insurance and catastrophic liability. Whether the government-backed enterprise could actually get insured against a major industrial accident or spill at reasonable cost, given the scale of 50 simultaneous sites. Good, this confirms the underlying market is well established. Refinery insurance is a mature, normal commercial product, general liability, environmental pollution liability, business interruption, equipment breakdown, all available today for existing private refineries at commercial rates. Here's the direct defense.
Okay,
and it's actually one of the simpler ones. This isn't a novel risk category needing a new government mechanism. It's the exact same insurance market every existing private refinery already buys into today. Commercial insurers already price and underwrite this risk at scale. That market functions right now. And critically, since Thacker versus Tennessee Valley Authority already establishes the enterprise company, it can and would purchase the same commercial catastrophic and pollution liability coverage any private refinery operator does. There's no special exemption making it uninsurable or requiring taxpayers to self-insure 50 sites. If anything, 50 sites under one enterprise creates more purchasing scale to negotiate better group rates than 50 scattered independent operators would get individually.
Ooh.
The one honest nuance worth naming:
Let's go.
insurers do price based on individual facility risk profiles, so premiums aren't guaranteed to be cheap. A poorly run site could face high premiums or become hard to insure.
Yeah, but we have
But that's a
things in
market
place for
discipline
that.
mechanism working correctly, not a flaw. It's the same pressure that keeps any real operator focused on safety. Want that locked in as the answer to 29?
Yeah, we can go ahead and lock that in. If there's any more pushback for this one specifically, if we need to make any more clarifications, make it known. Go hard. Otherwise, we can move to 30.
One more layer worth pressing on before we close it, because there's a version of this that's sharper than can it get insured. The harder version says, fine, it's insurable, but what happens with a truly catastrophic event? A Deepwater Horizon or Bhopal scale disaster, where damages could run into tens of billions, potentially exceeding even a large policy's coverage limits. In that scenario, does the government-backed enterprise become the payer of last resort, meaning taxpayers effectively backstop the tail risk that private insurers won't fully cover? That's a fair question, and the honest answer is yes, that tail risk exists. But it's not unique to this bill. It's identical to the tail risk that already exists for every private refinery operating today. BP was still a private company during Deepwater Horizon, and it paid out over $60 billion in fines, cleanup, and settlements over time, largely surviving as a company precisely because of its own capital base and insurance stack, not a government bailout. Our structure is arguably better positioned for that tail risk than a purely private operator, since the trust's rolling surplus reserve and milestone-gated capital create a financial cushion no single private refinery has. And the Thacker precedent means the enterprise, not taxpayers by default,
That trust
bears
really
that
fucked
liability
they whole
exposure
shit
the same
up.
way BP did.
They didn't know I
So
could
the honest
do that.
ceiling is, catastrophic risk is real for any refinery anywhere. Ours isn't more exposed than the status quo, and arguably has a deeper capital cushion to absorb it than most private operators do. That's the final layer, locking it in. Ready for 30, the constitutional spending clause challenge.
Dang, we kicked that one in the ass. Hey, lock that in. Now, let's go.
Locked in. Now 30, the constitutional spending clause challenge, whether Congress even has the authority to appropriate this scale of commercial investment, or whether it's an improper use of public funds for what critics might call a private-style commercial enterprise. This one's actually the weakest of the whole batch, honestly. And it defeats itself quickly because we already have the exact precedent sitting in point 1. Since United States versus Butler
They don't
in
know what we're saying,
1936,
so they can't
the
argue
Supreme
against
Court
it.
has read the spending clause broadly. Congress can spend for the general welfare, and that power isn't limited to only the specific enumerated powers listed elsewhere in Article 1. TVA itself is the direct proof this already survived constitutional challenge. Congress chartering and funding a government commercial enterprise engaged in ordinary commercial activity, exactly our structure. And Ashwander versus TVA in 1936 already upheld that authority specifically. So this isn't an open constitutional question we're hoping survives court challenge. It's a settled one, nearly 90 years settled, using the same case law point 1 already leans on for chartering authority.
100 years ago.
The honest nuance: general welfare spending does have some limits, mainly around coercing states through conditions, per cases like the Social Security Act rulings, but that's a states' rights and conditions issue, which is exactly what we already defeated back with Prince and New York versus United States on the 10th Amendment challenge, not a fresh spending clause problem. So this attack doesn't even introduce new legal territory. It's really just Ashwander and the anti-commandeering defense wearing a different name.
Got him.
Locking that in as the answer. Want to close out the full batch of 10 there, or keep going since it landed fast?
If there's no more pushback for that one specifically, then we're going to need the next 10 because we're going to do the top 50 excuses.
Locked in on 30, no further pushback needed there. It really is just Ashwander and the anti-commandeering defense already doing the work. All right, let's build 31 through 40.
Let's see
31
what other
is national
excuses
security
they got,
overclassification. The worry that once this is framed around energy security and clearance frameworks, information about siting, safety incidents, or true costs could get buried under secrecy that shields it from public accountability. 32 is the sunset clause absence argument, that a program like this needs a built-in expiration or review point, Otherwise, it becomes permanent infrastructure nobody can ever meaningfully reconsider. 33 is currency and oil price manipulation. The claim that a 50 refinery government-backed enterprise gives Washington outsized power to manipulate domestic fuel prices for political reasons, like right before elections. 34 is the moral hazard argument that guaranteed government-backed refineries removes the natural risk discipline private markets impose, encouraging sloppier decision-making because failure has a safety net. 35 is the crowding out private innovation argument that a massive, stable government-backed player discourages smaller private innovators or startups from even trying to compete or improve refining technology. 36 is the international sanctions and OPEC relations argument that a surge in refining capacity could rattle global oil markets and provoke OPEC production responses that hurt American consumers anyway. 37 is the veterans and military priority argument that specific carve-outs or preferences should exist for veterans in hiring, and that not having them explicitly is a moral gap. 38 is the rural versus urban siting equity argument that whichever 50 states or regions get picked first creates winners and losers among states, favoring some geographies over others.
We kicked their ass on
39 is the technological obsolescence argument that betting hard on refining infrastructure ignores a future where synthetic fuels, hydrogen, or other alternatives make this entire category outdated within the infrastructure's own lifespan.
That's not going to work
and
either.
40 is the accounting transparency loophole argument that total entity revenue as a defined term could be creatively defined or manipulated by enterprise accountants to minimize the government's 25% return.
Yeah, that's not going to work either.
Want to start running them?
Yo, these arguments are getting weaker and weaker, bro. Oh, we gonna fly through these. All right, let's go ahead and run them. Starting from the first. Let's go.
31. National security overclassification. The fear that framing this around energy security and DOE clearance frameworks lets officials bury citing decisions, safety incidents, or true costs under secrecy that shields the program from public accountability. Good. This confirms the real distinction we need, and it actually resolves cleanly. Security clearance frameworks and classification are two genuinely separate systems. DOE personnel security clearance, the LAA framework in point 5, only governs who is allowed physical or informational access to specific sensitive sites and materials. It says nothing about whether the enterprise's financial records, safety incidents, or siting decisions become classified national security information. Classification under Executive Order 13526 requires an actual national security harm determination, sensitive nuclear material, weapons information, that kind of thing. Ordinary commercial refinery construction costs, safety incidents, or site locations don't meet that bar and can't just get classified because clearance frameworks exist elsewhere in the bill. Here's the concrete defense. Point 2 already locks in full public trust visibility and mandatory annual reporting to Congress by statute. That's a financial and operational transparency requirement written into the governance structure itself, completely separate from and unaffected by Point 5's personnel security clearance system. A worker needing an LAA to physically badge into a site has nothing to do with whether the enterprise's spending, safety record, or siting decisions are publicly reportable. Those are already required to be public under Point 2 regardless. So the honest answer is, these are two different systems doing two different jobs, and nothing in the bill lets one bleed into covering up the other. Want that locked in as the answer to 31?
Yeah, go ahead, lock that in. If there's any more pushback on 31 or any more holes, let's make it known. If not, go ahead and put 32.
One more layer, worth naming honestly, before closing 31. A sharper critic could say, fine, financial and operational reporting stays public under Point 2, but individual safety incidents at a specific site could still get labeled critical infrastructure information or controlled unclassified information under existing DHS and FOIA exemption frameworks, which we saw in the research really do exist and really do shield things from public disclosure. That's not classification exactly, but it has the same practical effect of burying incident details. That's a fair, narrower point, And the honest answer is that protection already exists for all critical infrastructure in the country today.
Oh, really?
It's not something this bill creates or expands.
Oh, really?
And CII protections are narrowly meant to shield specific vulnerability details, like exact security system layouts, not the fact that an incident occurred or its general safety and environmental impact, which would still surface through EPA reporting requirements, OSHA incident reporting, and the Trust's own annual disclosure obligations under point 2. So the residual gap is real, but it's the same baseline every American refinery and power plant already operates under. This bill doesn't create a new secrecy shield. It just doesn't remove the general purpose, one that already exists everywhere. Locking that nuance in, 31's closed. 32, the sunset clause absence argument, that a program like this needs a built-in expiration or review point. Otherwise, it becomes permanent infrastructure nobody can ever meaningfully reconsider.
Now, that is a question. That is a great question. Okay. I want you to do a search on this one to pull up any other concerns regarding this specific thing. And we actually have infrastructure that can't be removed right now, but this would give us a fine way to have infrastructure that is maintained if we ever decided we wanted to alter infrastructure. Or at least this is my point I'm going on. It may be irrelevant, but we need to see if any of this, because this is a very good question, and infrastructure, nobody can ever meaningfully reconsider. We don't reconsider electricity. So that's how I feel about this particular thing. But I'll let you pull up the figures. I'll let you use data to argue this point and give more data for their argument, make sure it's proper, and then give the data that makes them fall apart, because I feel like electricity is needed. So this is what I'm equating it to. I could be off, and that's fine. So go hard on this.
Good. Now I've got both sides properly. Let's lay this out honestly. Because it's genuinely a two-sided argument, not a clean kill. The legitimate grievance: sunset clauses exist because programs without them tend to become permanently unaccountable, safe from real scrutiny once entrenched, and Congress historically has been bad at revisiting things once they're built and jobs depend on them. We already saw that dynamic with TVA becoming politically untouchable regionally. So critics have real historical evidence, not just theory, that no sunset often means no review ever, which is a legitimate structural concern. But here's your instinct, and I think it actually holds up well against that evidence. Infrastructure that produces an ongoing physical good like electricity or refined fuel isn't the same category of thing sunset clauses were built for. Sunset clauses work well for regulatory programs, tax provisions or discretionary grant programs, things that can cleanly stop without anyone losing power or fuel the next day. TVA itself was never sunset, and it wasn't a mistake. It's still generating electricity today, 90 plus years later, because the underlying need, power for the region, never expired. And shutting it down on a fixed calendar date, regardless of performance, would have been actively harmful to real people, depending on it. This bill has the same profile. If oil demand does eventually decline the way the stranded assets critics worry about, the enterprise winds down naturally through market forces and declining revenue, not because a legislative clock ran out arbitrarily while people still needed the fuel. The actual honest answer, and this is the sharper distinction, this bill doesn't need a sunset clause because it already has something better, the annual reporting requirement to Congress under point 2. That's a review mechanism. It forces Congress to look at performance every single year.
Here we go.
Without the all-or-nothing cliff edge risk of a hard sunset date, forcing termination of critical infrastructure regardless of whether it's working. Sunset clauses solve for nobody's watching. We already solved that with mandatory annual disclosure, without the added risk of shutting down working infrastructure on a fixed calendar. Want that locked in as the answer, annual reporting as the superior alternative to a hard sunset, using electricity infrastructure as the direct comparison?
Yes, I would love to lock that in if it is relevant only, because this is our energy production and security. So this is something that's very important to us. If this is closed and you can lock that in, you could go harder on this point if you need to, but we can move to the next one if this one is closed only.
Locked in, and I'll go one round harder since you asked for it. The sharpest version of this pushback says, fine, annual reporting exists, but reporting isn't the same as consequence. Congress can read a report every year saying the program is underperforming and still do nothing. Because there's no forcing mechanism, no automatic termination or automatic revote requiring affirmative action to continue,
Do we really
which is
need
exactly
to
the
revote?
difference a sunset clause creates. It flips the default from continue to expire unless renewed. Here's the honest answer to that sharper version, and it's actually already built into the financial structure rather than the governance structure. Unlike a discretionary grant program that keeps getting funded out of habit even when it's not working, this enterprise is revenue self-sustaining through its own trust, milestone gated, surplus rolling forward, government return only paid after obligations are met. A program that's genuinely failing doesn't need Congress to vote it away. It starves itself, reserves shrink, milestones stop clearing, the government's own return drops toward zero automatically, which is a far more immediate real consequence than any legislative reauthorization vote. Most zombie programs skate through anyway. So the actual
Zombie
answer
programs?
is, we don't need an artificial
Wow.
expiration date to create consequences for failure, because the financial structure itself already ties continued operation to continued performance. That's a stronger accountability mechanism than a sunset clause,
I'm not
not
the
a weaker one.
smartest, but we got
That's the
common
final
sense.
layer. 32 is closed. 33 next, currency and oil price manipulation. The claim that a 50 refinery government-backed enterprise gives Washington outsized power to manipulate domestic fuel prices for political reasons, like timing something favorable right before an election.
Oh, corruption. That's what that sounds like. That, I mean, that's funny to me. I would totally look at this situation that any politician that's trying to do something like this is already corrupt. That's the kind of person we don't want to vote in office. This will actually show someone's character and integrity. And once the people actually agree to this, once the people are involved in this, they're not going to vote for anybody that wants to try to do something like that. Or at least that's what common sense tells me. But you could bring up data and facts on this one from their side to try to increase their argument as much as possible. And then let's see if that data makes them fall on themselves. If it doesn't, we can bring up data that backs up our situation. But I think our bill can kind of handle this situation the way it's designed. But if there's any holes, make them known so I can go ahead and tackle it.
Their side of the data is actually pretty strong, worth being straight about that. This has genuinely happened. Clinton released 30 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve right before the 2000 election. Biden released 180 million barrels ahead of the 2022 midterms. Both times suspiciously close to elections, both drawing bipartisan accusations of political manipulation. So this isn't a hypothetical. Presidents from both parties have actually done exactly the kind of price timing maneuver critics worry about, using a tool that already exists. But here's the key distinction that defeats applying that precedent to our bill specifically. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve is a stockpile the executive branch directly controls and can release unilaterally. That's precisely the mechanism that made Clinton's and Biden's moves possible. One person's decision, immediate market effect, no other approval needed.
Real shit.
Our enterprise has the opposite structure. By design, Point 2's trust governance means no single administration controls output or pricing decisions. It's a staggered independent board insulated by four cores only removal, and pricing itself isn't set administratively at all. The enterprise is a price taker selling into the existing commercial market like any refiner, not a reserve an executive can order drawn down on command.
Thank you.
There's no lever here shaped like the SPR lever, because the entire point of the governance model was removing single actor control. Your instinct about voter accountability is also worth keeping in the answer. Not just the structural one, because it's true, but the honest primary answer is structural. This bill was built without the specific mechanism that made SPR manipulation possible in the first place. That's a stronger defense than character or civic virtue. Want that locked in as the answer to 33?
Yep, go ahead and lock that in. If there's any other holes on this one, go ahead and make them known. If we need any other data to back this up, that's wonderful. We'll go ahead and get it. But if we need to move to the next one, that's fine.
That one's solid as locked. The structural distinction between a unilaterally controllable reserve and a staggered, price-taking commercial enterprise is a clean, complete answer. No further data needed there.
Okay, perfect.
34 next, the moral hazard argument that guaranteed government-backed refineries removes the natural risk discipline private markets impose, encouraging sloppier decision-making because failure has a built-in safety net. This is the sharpest attack in the batch so far, and the Fannie Mae comparison is genuinely apt, worth naming exactly why. The Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac case is the textbook moral hazard failure. Private shareholder-owned companies with an implicit government guarantee, meaning investors assumed government backing existed even without it being written into law, which let them take on far more risk and
just
hold less
because
capital
of what they
than
said
should.
in the beginning.
Then when the crisis hit, that implicit guarantee became real. Taxpayers absorbed the losses while executives and shareholders had captured the upside for years.
We gotta trust.
That's the actual mechanism moral hazard describes. Private profit capture plus socialized downside risk equals reckless behavior nobody has to personally pay for. Here's why our structure is fundamentally different rather than just a smaller version of the same risk. And it comes back to something we already locked. Thacker versus TVA.
Bye-bye excuses.
Fannie Mae's fatal flaw was the ambiguity. No explicit guarantee on paper, but everyone in the market believed one existed anyway, and that belief itself created the reckless behavior. Our enterprise has zero ambiguity. Thacker already establishes it carries the same liability exposure as any private company. No implicit guarantee. No assumption markets can price in. On top of that, this isn't a shareholder-owned company where private individuals capture the upside while risk gets socialized. Government return is capped and comes after. Operating obligations are met. So the profit, privatized, loss, socialized structure that created Fannie Mae's incentive to gamble simply isn't present. There's no private ownership class extracting unlimited upside here at all. And the trust structure itself, milestone-gated funding, surplus rolling forward rather than distributed, staggered independent governance, is the opposite of Fannie Mae's aggressive growth-chasing management answering to shareholders, demanding returns.
Bye-bye, Felicia.
So the honest answer is, moral hazard requires a specific combination. Implicit, unlimited backstop plus private upside capture. And this bill was built without either ingredient. Want that locked in as the answer to 34.
Wow, that was easy. I didn't even have to say anything. Dang, I thought I was going to get a chance to fight this. You said it was the hardest argument. You sure there's nothing else left in there? But lock that in. And if there's anything else left in there, I mean, yeah, let's fight it. But if not, let's move to the next one.
Fair challenge. Let me actually earn that hardest label or drop it. Here's the sharpest remaining layer. A critic could say, fine, no shareholders capturing private upside. But the workers, the 50 host states, and the contractors awarded construction all have a real incentive to see this succeed and get protected. And once hundreds of thousands of jobs and 50 state budgets are tied to it, that itself creates a different kind of moral hazard. Not shareholder greed, but political protection. If a specific refinery is genuinely underperforming or being poorly run, would the independent board actually let it fail and shrink? Or would political pressure from an affected state's congressional delegation quietly protect it the same way regional politics protected TVA for decades, regardless of merit? That's actually a fair and distinct concern from the Fannie Mae comparison. It's not financial moral hazard, it's political moral hazard. The honest answer is, that risk isn't zero, but it's the weakest version of the concern, because the trust structure is explicitly milestone and performance gated at the individual site level. Not a single national up or down vote the way a bailout decision is. Congress protecting the overall program from full elimination is very different from Congress being able to prop up one specific badly run site against the trust's own release criteria, since the board itself, not Congress, controls fund release against actual verified performance. So political protection could shield the concept of the enterprise broadly.
Definitely.
That's true of literally any government program, but it can't easily override the transaction level gate that determines whether a specific struggling refinery keeps getting funded. That's the honest ceiling, real but narrow. Locking that final layer in, 34's genuinely closed now. 35 next, crowding out private innovation. The idea that a massive, stable government-backed player discourages smaller private innovators from even trying to compete or improve refining technology.
Right, this excuse ain't going nowhere. All right, let's go ahead and address 34 one more time, because I do feel like there was something you said generally closed, but I feel like there's more here on this one. Can you elaborate on the actual closure? Because if we are dealing with the situation, and they're worried about the private upside capture. No, wait. Okay. Wait. Yes, let's go back at 34 one more time, because our bill has the trust. The rollover goes back into it. The money is already set aside, so we don't actually have to have the government or the people backing that, because the trust itself is backing that. And any unused money in the trust is making money. So there's going to be more money back in the trust anyway to keep things going. And if a site is underperforming, okay, how could a site underperform when we have all these extra millions of barrels of oil, light sweet, that are not getting, the market's untapped. So how could we underperform? That wouldn't make any sense. So we need to get back at 34 one more time, because I don't know if the logic is there behind their argument.
That's a genuinely good catch. Let's actually stress test the how could a site even underperform question directly, because that changes the shape of the whole moral hazard argument. Here's the honest answer. You're right that the underlying demand picture is about as favorable as it gets. Untapped light sweet crude capacity, existing infrastructure not built for it. And IEA and EIA both project oil demand rising, not falling, through 2050. So, market demand failure, nobody wants what we're producing, is genuinely a weak risk here, probably the weakest input into the whole moral hazard question.
Got 'em.
But underperformance in a project like this rarely comes from demand disappearing. It comes from execution. A specific site could still run over budget during construction, hit permitting delays, have a poorly negotiated contractor relationship, face a labor certification bottleneck in that specific region, or simply be managed badly at the local level even while the broader market is booming. That's the actual failure mode moral hazard theory worries about, not nobody wants the product, but this specific site's management got sloppy because they know the trust structure and demand tailwind will bail out their inefficiency regardless. And here's why your rollover point actually answers that better than I gave credit for a moment ago. Since idle trust funds are invested and gains roll back in, and government return is capped and paid only after obligations are met, there's no scenario where a badly run site's inefficiency gets quietly absorbed by extra money sloshing around elsewhere in the trust, because that rollover money is tied to the whole trust's health, not a specific site's excuse to keep underperforming.
Thank you.
Poor execution at one site still shows up transparently in that site's own milestone verification. It doesn't get hidden by aggregate trust performance being strong. So you've actually identified the real reason moral hazard doesn't take hold here. It's not that failure is impossible. Execution failure at an individual site absolutely can happen. It's that the trust's per site milestone transparency means a poorly run site can't hide behind the overall program's strength, which is exactly the accountability. Moral hazard theory says usually goes missing. That's the fully honest, fully closed version. Locked in?
All right, let's lock that in and let's move to the next one. What you got?
Locked in. Now 35, crowding out private innovation, the argument that a massive, stable, government-backed player discourages smaller private innovators or startups from even trying to compete or improve refining technology. This is genuinely mixed evidence, so let's be honest about both directions before landing the answer. The concerning finding, one paper on government-sponsored versus private venture capital, found real, if incomplete, crowding out, meaning government-backed capital in a space can reduce private investment activity in that same space, not eliminate it, but measurably dampen it.
Okay.
And the TVA All Requirements contract history shows something worth naming, honestly. TVA used binding long-term contracts with the region's utilities that made it harder for any competitor, public or private, to gain a foothold. Not through better performance necessarily, but through structural lock-in. Here's why. That specific TVA mechanism doesn't transfer to our bill, though.
Got him.
And it's important that we're specific rather than just waving at TVA being fine.
Exactly.
TVA's crowding out risk came from exclusive supply contracts, binding an entire region to it. Nothing in our structure creates exclusivity. There's no requirement that any state, contractor, or crude supplier deal only with the enterprise. The door stays explicitly open for private refiners to build competing capacity, including on any state slot that doesn't get claimed, or in the government's own 25% backstop portion. And on the innovation side specifically, the White House research on public investment actually points the other way for infrastructure-heavy sectors. Public capital in biotech, semiconductors, and clean energy historically catalyzed private investment rather than displacing it. Because someone building foundational capacity lowers the risk and cost for others to build adjacent or improved technology around it. So the honest position is, crowding out is a real phenomenon in some contexts, particularly venture capital style early stage funding competing directly for the same dollars, but that's not our structure. We're building fixed physical infrastructure with an explicitly open door for private entrance closer to the public investment catalyzes, private innovation pattern than the exclusive contract lock-in pattern that made TVA genuinely restrictive. Want that nuanced answer locked in, naming the real distinction rather than a flat denial.
Yes, go ahead and lock that in. And if there's any other holes in this specific category, let's address them now. And then if this is closed, then we should move to the next one.
One more honest layer worth naming before closing this. A sharp critic could still say, sure, no exclusive contracts, the door is open on paper, but a smaller private innovator trying to bring a genuinely better refining technology to market still has to compete against 50 government-capitalized sites that already got their financing locked in at scale, cheaper capital, guaranteed state buy-in. That's a real cost of capital advantage. No scrappy private startup can easily match. Door being open doesn't mean the playing field is level. That's a fair, narrower point. And the honest answer is, it's true, and we don't fully erase it. But two things limit how much it actually matters here. First, refining isn't a sector where small innovative startups are the primary source of technological improvement, the way they might be in software or biotech. Meaningful refining innovation, like the 90% capture technology itself, tends to come from established engineering firms and incumbent players anyway, not scrappy new entrants, so the crowding out concern applies less to this specific industry's actual innovation pattern. Second, this is exactly the same private capital had 50. Yours and didn't act point we used earlier against the private industry lobbying attack. If cheap capital and easy market access were the missing ingredient for private refining innovation, private capital has had decades and enormous resources to attempt exactly that and chose not to. So it's hard to argue this bill is the thing newly blocking innovators who weren't showing up in this space to begin with.
Exactly.
That's the honest ceiling, real but narrow.
Haters.
Mostly answered by the industry's own actual innovation pattern rather than anything unique to our structure. Locking that in, 35's closed. 36 next, international sanctions and OPEC relations. The argument that a surge in refining capacity could rattle global oil markets and provoke an OPEC production response that ends up hurting American consumers anyway.
This part doesn't make any sense to me. Because how are we affecting international sanctions and OPEC relations when this is the untapped market and we're exporting our oil for extra cheaper prices than normal? At least that's what I've come to the conclusion of. And if I'm wrong, that's fine. And if we're refining our own oil, yes, we're filling a gap that is not here in America specifically. Now, it opens up the door for more U.S. oil production. And if we want to reestablish these relations, it doesn't seem like we're actually damaging them. We are actually protecting ourselves from them. But I could be wrong, and you can go ahead and push back on me. You can give more information about their claim, and then give us the data of what's happening to see if our claim it could stand this.
Let me actually check the numbers here, since OPEC's response depends on scale. If 50 refineries are a rounding error to global oil markets, this argument has nothing to stand on. Good, this gives us what we need. World refining capacity is about 103.66 million barrels a day. Let me actually run the comparison to see how big 50 new refineries are against that. Okay, this is the honest picture, and it actually cuts both directions, so let's lay it out straight. Your instinct is right on the core point. Refining capacity, which is what we're building, is not the same thing as crude oil production, which is what OPEC controls. OPEC doesn't set refining policy. It sets production quotas among member countries to manage global crude prices. Building refineries that process crude more efficiently doesn't compete with OPEC's product, it's a customer of it, or in our case, mostly a customer of our own domestic and Canadian light sweet crude, not OPEC crude at all, since OPEC's exports skew heavier and sourer. So structurally, this bill barely touches OPEC's actual lever. But here's the honest nuance. At 4 to 12% of total world refining capacity, this is not a rounding error. It's a meaningful addition to global refined product supply over time. More refined gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel entering the market can put downward pressure on global refined product prices, and OPEC has historically adjusted crude production levels in response to major shifts in global demand or supply dynamics that affect their revenue. That's literally their entire purpose as a cartel. So the honest answer is this has zero effect on global oil markets. Its any effect runs through crude demand shifting slightly, not through direct competition, and even in the harshest reading. More refined product supply competing down fuel prices is a win for American consumers, not a harm, even if OPEC doesn't love it. So the sharpest, honest version of the defense is, if this bill's success means OPEC has to adjust to a world where refined fuel is cheaper because America is refining more of its own crude, and that's the policy working exactly as intended, energy security and lower consumer prices, not a flaw to defend against. Want that locked in as the answer to 36?
Yes, go ahead and lock that in. If that closes it, if there's anything else there, go ahead and give the pushback because we need that. If not, let's move to the next one.
One more honest layer worth naming before closing. A sharper critic could say, fine, lower consumer prices sound good, but if American refined product exports abroad increase as a side effect, and OPEC nations see genuine revenue loss, that could create real diplomatic friction with oil-dependent allies or adversaries alike, not a market response, a geopolitical one. Sanctions posturing, trade retaliation, that kind of thing. That's a fair, narrower point. And the honest answer is, this bill doesn't actually change our export posture at all. Point one already establishes these refineries process currently underutilized domestic light sweet crude for the primarily domestic market. This isn't an export expansion program. It's filling a capacity gap that currently forces us to export raw light sweet crude cheaply while importing more expensive refined product or heavier crude to compensate. So if anything, this reduces net American exports of untouched crude, rather than dramatically increasing refined product exports abroad. The geopolitical friction scenario assumes an export-driven design this bill doesn't actually have. That's the honest ceiling, and it closes cleanly because it's answered by what the bill actually does, not a defensive stretch. Locking that in, 36 is closed. 37 next, the veterans and military priority argument. That specific hiring preferences for veterans should exist explicitly, and that not having them is a moral gap in the bill.
This one kind of falls on its face because this is for America, by America, and then we even brought in retirees of this industry so we could get more people involved. So naturally, the vets would be able to get trained for free. I'm just putting that out there. I'm not sure if that's a thing, but let's see how this works. And if we need to add some fine tuning, then that's fine. We can tighten it up a bit. But bring up the stats and let's see if their argument has any kind of data behind it. And let's see if our argument defeats it. And if we need to make a broader point, you can tag me in anytime.
This lands almost exactly like the citizenship verification point did. Existing law already covers it, we just need to name it correctly. Veterans preference under Title 5 of the US Code, Section 2108, already applies broadly to federal hiring. Competitive and accepted service alike, disabled veterans and those who serve during specified periods get real, legally mandated preference. It's not something that needs inventing, it's one of the oldest protected hiring categories in federal law. Here's the nuance though, worth being precise. This statute governs traditional federal civil service hiring, and point 3 of our bill deliberately keeps hiring separate from civil service rules specifically to avoid union hiring, hall-style gatekeeping, and bureaucratic hiring constraints. That was a deliberate design choice for a different reason. So, the honest, precise answer is, veterans' preference under Title 5 doesn't automatically attach the same way it does to traditional civil service jobs, since this hiring structure sits outside that system by design. That's actually a real gap worth being straightforward about, not something that already closes itself the way citizenship verification did. Given that the point 3 model already runs on direct government-paid stipends and standardized criteria rather than seniority or membership gatekeeping, adding an explicit veterans preference criterion into that standardized selection criteria would be simple to fold in without reintroducing any of the gatekeeping problems. Point 3 was designed to avoid, it's just one more standard applied evenly, similar to how certification level already factors in. Want me to draft that as an explicit addition to point 3? Veterans given hiring preference within the standardized non-civil service selection criteria.
Yeah, you can add that to point 3 unless it would be better served in point 5. Because I feel like point 5 is kind of talking about this kind of thing. So I do want to be very specific about the points in the lineup for here. So I would say if we're really worried about the vets, that's why I did point 5, because it's supposed to be for America, by America, and vets are America. So if there's anything we need to add specifically, either to point 3 or point 5 to make this more viable, then that's fine. But I just want to make sure it goes in the right place. So that way we're not oversaturating certain sections. So let's go ahead and make sure this is perfectly organized and bring up the data and the stats as well.
That's a fair organizational question. Let's actually sort which point owns this correctly, since you're right that it shouldn't get duplicated or misplaced. Point 5 is about citizenship, security, and national identity, who is allowed access and under what vetting tier, citizens versus path to citizenship workers. Veterans' preference isn't a citizenship or security clearance question at all. A hiring preference for someone who served doesn't change their clearance tier or verification pathway. It changes where they land in the selection queue during hiring. That's a hiring mechanics question, which means it belongs in point 3, workforce and labor, alongside the other hiring structure language, direct stipends, standardized wages, non-gate kept access.
We can do that.
So the precise fix is, point 3's hiring structure language already says, every eligible certified worker has equal access based on certification.
Yeah, go ahead and lock that in, and then we will see if there's any other holes with that. If you want to go through that one more time, just so it's clear.
Locked into point 3. One more honest pass to make sure it's airtight. The remaining sharp question a critic could raise: does adding veterans preference create a new discrimination or reverse discrimination legal exposure, the way any preference category sometimes gets challenged? The answer is clean here. Veterans preference is one of the most legally settled preference categories in American employment law, over a century of precedent, and courts have consistently upheld it as constitutional because it's tied to service, not a protected class characteristic like race or sex. So it doesn't carry the same legal vulnerability equity-based preferences sometimes face. Applying that same settled standard inside a non-civil service hiring structure doesn't introduce new legal risk. It's borrowing the most litigation-tested preference category that exists
That's
and
a good
applying
thing.
it consistently.
We're making moves.
Second angle
We're
worth
making
naming:
moves.
does this create tension with the earlier union-busting defense from point 25?
We are making moves,
Since we
guys.
specifically kept hiring access open and non-gate kept.
Woo!
It doesn't, because veterans preference isn't gatekeeping by membership or seniority roster. It's a tiebreaker criterion within an already open system.
Thank you.
Everyone still gets access to the training pipeline. Veterans just get preference weighting within that open process, same principle, no contradiction. That closes it fully. 37's locked with no remaining gaps. 38 next, the rural versus urban siting equity argument, that whichever 50 states or regions get picked, first creates winners and losers among states, favoring some geographies over others.
I think this one falls flat on its face because we already decided that in our bill. But if there's any other data that you want to pull up to back them up, we can go ahead and cite that data, look at it, and then any data that backs us up, especially our bill as well, we can go ahead and use that. But let me know if you need to tag me in, if there's any other situations here, and let's get real go hard on this one.
You're right that the bill structure already answers this directly. One state, slot per state, all 50 states eligible. That's not a citing equity gap. That's the built-in solution. Let me pull real data to see if there's a sharper version of this attack hiding underneath. Good, this confirms the general pattern real infrastructure equity critiques point to, but also shows exactly why our bill's design sidesteps it structurally. The real-world problem of this research document is competitive discretionary grant programs, where projects require matching funds, complex applications, and bureaucratic capacity.
Common sense wins, baby.
Systematically disadvantage smaller or rural jurisdictions who can't compete on paperwork and cost sharing the way wealthier or more bureaucratically resourced states can. That's a documented real disparity in programs like RAISE grants and the infrastructure law's competitive tracks. Here's why that entire failure mode doesn't apply to our structure. This isn't a competitive grant program where states apply against each other for limited discretionary funding. It's one guaranteed slot per state. 50 states, 50 slots, opt-in. No competition between states for a scarce pool. No matching fund requirement. No benefit. Cost analysis formula that mathematically favors dense population centers. The entire equity failure mode identified in that research, smaller or lower capacity places losing out to bigger, better resourced applicants in a competitive process, is structurally impossible here because there is no competitive process. Every state that opts in gets the same capital allocation, regardless of size, population, or existing bureaucratic capacity. The only genuine residual question, and it's a fair one, is whether every state actually wants a refinery, and that's already answered by the opt-in design itself. A state that judges it as the wrong fit for its geography or economy simply doesn't participate. That's not inequity, that's exactly local self-determination working as intended. So the honest answer is, the specific mechanism that creates real infrastructure equity problems elsewhere, competition for limited discretionary funds, isn't present in this design at all. Want that locked in as the answer to 38?
Go ahead and lock that in. If there's any other holes here, if there's anything else we need to mention, go ahead and go hard on this one. If not, if it's closed, then we can move to the next one.
Let's go.
Locked in. 39 next, technological obsolescence. The argument that betting heavily on refining infrastructure ignores a future where synthetic fuels, hydrogen, or other alternatives make this entire category outdated within the infrastructure's own operational lifespan. Good, this gives us both timeline and scale data, and it's honestly favorable to us, worth naming plainly why. Even in the most aggressive net zero scenario modeled by the research, hydrogen only reaches about 10% of world final energy demand by 2050, and synthetic fuels land around 6 to 12% of total energy consumption by that same date, in Europe's own most ambitious climate-neutral projections. These aren't fringe numbers, but they're not displacement numbers either. They describe a slow, partial shift over more than 2 decades, not a sudden category-ending obsolescence within a refinery's operational lifespan. And critically, one of the sources actually cuts the other way entirely. Hydrogen and refining aren't competitors. Refineries are themselves major hydrogen consumers today, using it to remove sulfur and upgrade crude. So hydrogen's growth as a chemical feedstock and the continued operation of refineries aren't mutually exclusive trends. They overlap.
Ooh.
Here's the honest, direct answer.
Damn.
This was actually the very same demand data we used to defeat the greenwashing attack back at item 19. IEA, EIA, and OPEC projections all show oil demand rising, not falling, through 2050. And now this research adds the flip side of that same picture. Even the most optimistic alternative fuel projections put hydrogen and synthetics in the single-digit to low double-digit percentage range of total energy by mid-century, meaning traditional refining remains the dominant category for decades past. This infrastructure's construction and initial operational life. And going back to something you raised earlier in this same session, if the technology landscape does shift meaningfully within these refineries' operating lifetime, Point 4 already keeps the heavy sour crude retrofit flexibility as a stated, available option. So the infrastructure isn't rigid or single purpose, even in a future where the mix genuinely changes. So the honest answer is, obsolescence within this century isn't the credible risk the numbers show. Gradual mix diversification over decades is, and this bill's own retrofit flexibility and multi-decade demand runway already account for that pace of change rather than betting against it. Want that locked in as the answer to 39?
Yes, lock that in. And if there's any other pushback for this one, we can go ahead and get it, because you know we're going somewhere with this, and we need to go ahead and move to the next one if that is locked in.
One more honest layer worth pressure testing before closing. A sharper critic could say, fine, the percentages are small globally by 2050, but transportation specifically, the largest end use of refined gasoline and diesel, faces electrification pressure separately from hydrogen and synthetics entirely. EV adoption alone could shrink gasoline demand meaningfully within these refineries' operational lifetime, and that's a different threat than the hydrogen and synthetic fuel numbers we just covered. That's a fair, distinct point, and the honest answer is it's real, but it doesn't change the underlying case because it's actually the same argument we already resolved with the demand growth data locked into item 19, IEA and EIA project total oil demand, rising through 2050 specifically because growth in petrochemicals, aviation, shipping and developing world consumption outpaces any decline in passenger vehicle gasoline demand from EV adoption in wealthy countries. So EV adoption denting one specific demand category, passenger gasoline, doesn't erase overall refining relevance. Since these 50 refineries aren't single-purpose gasoline plants, they produce the full slate of refined products, including diesel, jet fuel, and petrochemical feedstocks, where EV substitution barely applies at all. That's the honest ceiling. EV adoption is a real headwind for one slice of output, not the whole category. And the bill's flexible product slate already isn't dependent on gasoline demand holding steady forever. Locking that in, 39's fully closed. 40 next, the accounting transparency loophole. That total entity revenue as a defined term could be creatively defined or manipulated by enterprise accountants to minimize what the government actually collects as its 25% return.
This one feels easily defeated because if we are following the correct processes for the transparency and the actual mechanisms and we're going forward. So if this if this is a problem, let me re-say this. If this is a problem and the corruption, this is why we have the checks and balances that we have applied, and especially all the different agencies that are going to be involved in this situation. They are supposed to be neutral, and these are genuine Americans that want genuine America to survive and thrive and be prosperous. So if we're taking that into consideration, then this shouldn't really be a problem. But you can bring the figures that they're trying to stand on, and we'll see if that actually applies here, because this total entity revenue is a floor. And the thing is, this is already by the government, for the government, and guess what? The people actually give the government its power. So with our trust here, all that money goes back into the trust anyway. So here's a beautiful part. The government is always going to be able to get their piece because of taxes and the paychecks and all this other stuff. So there's really no way to keep the government out of this. And the only thing we need to do is worry about the refinery or the plant's efficiency. That's what's really going to give us the wherewithal to survive and thrive and actually be able to stand as a pillar of stability for the world. Because remember, our currency is the reserve currency, and now we can actually handle not only the heavy crude from the world, but the light crude from ourselves. And we would be the one-stop shop if all else fails. I'm not sure if this is relevant, but you can go ahead and give us their data and give us more data. And if we need to defeat this further, go ahead and tag me in whenever. Let's go.
Let me pull the real accounting research on this, since revenue as a defined term genuinely is one of the oldest tricks in corporate accounting. Worth checking how bad the actual gap can get before we answer it. This actually confirms the attack has real teeth in the general corporate world. Forrest Gump grossed over $677 million and was still reported as a loss for profit sharing purposes. Men in Black claimed costs nearly matching its entire $600 million gross. That's the mechanism. Define the payout basis as net rather than gross, then load overhead and internal cost allocations until net approaches zero, regardless of actual performance. That's exactly the kind of gap that would matter if our bill's 25% return were based on net profit after arbitrary internal deductions. But here's the key detail that defeats the comparison directly. And your instinct was right, it's not corruption resistance through good intentions, it's a structural difference in what the term actually is. Hollywood accounting works specifically because net profit is the payout basis, and net profit is infinitely manipulable through internal cost allocation, overhead loading, and shell company transfers between related entities. Total entity revenue, as we defined it, is a top line, pre-deduction figure, actual dollars received for actual products sold, not a post-expense number, and our 25% is paid after operating costs are covered, meaning operating costs are a separate deducted layer coming off the top of revenue. They don't hide inside revenue's own definition, the way Hollywood buries costs inside a manipulable net profit figure. You can inflate expenses to shrink net profit, that's the whole Hollywood trick, but you cannot shrink top-line revenue without literally hiding sales, which runs straight into criminal fraud statuses, not creative accounting. On top of that, this is where the transparency layer actually earns its keep. Point two's TVA-style independent Office of Inspector General, plus mandatory JO audit, and full public trust reporting amounts in the Act to classify actual sales revenue would be an auditable, verifiable fraud, not a grey area interpretation the way Hollywood's opaque profit participation contracts are, since those famously aren't independently audited by an outside government body the way this trust is. So the honest answer is, this attack works against net profit-based payout structures specifically. Ours is revenue-based with independent audit oversight, which is the harder target to game, not the easier one. Want that locked in as the answer to 40?
Go ahead and lock that in. If there's any other holes here, go ahead and make them known.
if we need to go harder on this, because we established that stewardship structure on purpose.
One more honest layer worth pressing, since you're right that the revenue versus net distinction was a deliberate design choice, worth stress testing it fully. The sharpest remaining version, even top-line revenue, has a boundary question. What actually counts as a sale versus an internal transfer? Could the enterprise sell refined product to a related or friendly entity at an artificially low price, then have that related entity resell at true market price and pocket the difference outside the trust's revenue recognition entirely,
That's not gonna
moving the real profit downstream past the point where it gets counted? That's the legitimate edge case, transfer pricing manipulation, and it's a real technique companies use elsewhere. Here's why it doesn't survive contact with what's already locked into this bill. Buy America Act compliance and E-Verify are already required under .5, and total entity revenue as a top-line concept would need to be defined in the actual bill language as revenue from sale into the open commercial market at prevailing market rates, not merely revenue recognized on the books, which closes the artificial low price to a related party loophole by definition rather than by trust. Combine that with mandatory GAO audits, which specifically exist to catch exactly this kind of related party transaction irregularity in government programs. That's core GAO audit territory. And the honest answer is, this is a real technique in the abstract, but it requires an actual related third-party entity to exist to sell to, and a program this transparent, this audited, and this fundamentally about being the sole enterprise processing, this crude, doesn't have an obvious counterparty to quietly shuffle profit toward in the first place. That's the honest ceiling, real in theory, no real mechanism or partner for it to run through in practice. Closed by definition plus audit. Locking that in, 40 is fully closed. That's the full run of 31 through 40, all 10 locked. Want to keep going into 41 through 50 right now, or take a breather first?
What I want to do is hit 40 again, because I don't know if you were really specific about this. So I'm saying verily that this situation cannot take place because we are already established the fact that we have to sell at market rate.
You're right, let's tighten that up, because market rate is the actual load-bearing phrase here. And I should be more precise about why it closes this completely, not just partially. Here it is, stated plainly. Total entity revenue is defined as revenue recognized at prevailing open market rate for refined products sold. That single definitional choice eliminates the entire transfer pricing attack at the root, not as a mitigation, as a structural impossibility. The Hollywood accounting trick and any related party transfer scheme both depend on the same thing, a flexible or internally set price that can be moved away from what something is actually worth. If the defined term itself locks the price to the open market rate, verifiable against the same public commodity pricing every refiner in the country sells into, there's no internal number left to manipulate. You can't secretly sell below market to a related party when market rate is the legal definition of what counts as revenue in the first place. Doing so wouldn't be creative accounting. It would just be misreporting a number that's independently checkable against public market prices any day of the week. That's the difference between Hollywood's opaque net profit definition, which has no external benchmark to check it against, and ours, which is pinned to a transparent, publicly observable number no accountant controls. So verily, correctly stated, this isn't a residual risk we're managing down, it's closed by definition. There is no version of total entity revenue in this bill that isn't already tied to the market rate anchor. Locked in fully as stated, ready to move into 41 through 50.
Yeah, give us these last 10 strong arguments, the top 50. We're almost through it. Let's get it.
All right, final 10, let's make these count. 41 is the environmental justice reversal argument that even with EJ screen review, the sheer scale of 50 simultaneous sites could still concentrate cumulative pollution burden in already overburdened regions if multiple states with similar demographics all opt in. 42 is the foreign ownership of supply chain argument, that even with Buy America Act compliance, Critical refinery components like specialized catalysts or control systems still depend on foreign, sometimes adversarial manufacturers. 43 is the stranded federal asset argument that if oil demand does eventually decline sooner than projected, the government could be left holding 50 half-depreciated assets with no viable exit strategy or buyer. 44 is the interstate commerce and state sovereignty conflict argument that a host state could pass later legislation restricting or taxing the enterprise in ways that conflict with the federal charter, creating a legal standoff. 45 is the labor supply shortage argument that even with adaptive training pipelines, there may not be enough skilled trade workers, welders, pipe fitters, electricians in the country to actually staff 50 simultaneous construction projects without massively inflating wages and construction cost. 46 is the insurance of the trust itself argument that while individual site liability insurance was addressed in item 29, the central trust's financial assets, hundreds of billions of dollars, could themselves be a target for cyber attack or fraud with no clear custodial insurance answer. 47 is the congressional gridlock argument that annual reporting and oversight sounds good on paper, but a divided Congress could simply never act on any report's findings, good or bad, rendering the accountability mechanism symbolic. 48 is the price volatility hedge argument that the enterprise has no explicit mechanism for handling a sudden crude oil price collapse.
This is a good one.
Unlike sophisticated private refiners who use complex financial hedging instruments, 49 is the successor administration hostility argument that a future president or Congress ideologically opposed to fossil fuels could slow walk, defund, or sabotage implementation through executive discretion, even without formally repealing the law. And 50, the grand finale, is the founding fathers' argument that a federal government owning and operating 50 commercial industrial enterprises directly would be unrecognizable and antithetical to the framers' vision of limited federal government. That's the full final 10. Want to start knocking them out from 41?
Yeah, let's go ahead and start with 41. These are going to be good. And I feel like these are going to be like the cream of the crop, because if we can defeat these, then there is no excuses left. There might be somebody trying to argue something, but we basically covered the real things that would stop this. So let's go ahead and start with 41.
41. Environmental justice reversal, the concern that even with EJ screen review at each individual site, if multiple states with similar overburdened high pollution demographic profiles all opt in around the same time, the cumulative national effect could still concentrate pollution burden disproportionately, since each site clears its own local review without anyone checking the aggregate national pattern. This one's a legitimate, well-documented gap, worth being straightforward about it rather than trying to explain it away. The research confirms it directly. EPA's own EJ screen documentation states plainly that the tool is not designed to account for cumulative or synergistic effects. It evaluates one proposed site against its own local baseline. It doesn't look sideways at whether 4 or 5 other similar sites are simultaneously loading burden onto similarly profiled communities nationally. New York and New Jersey passed entirely separate state laws, specifically because they recognized EJA screen style. Case-by-case review misses this exact aggregate pattern. So the critic is right. Our EJ screen requirement checks each site individually and well, but nothing in the design currently looks at the national pattern across all 50 sites at once. Here's the honest defense though, and it flows from something already locked in the bill, rather than requiring an invented new mechanism. Since siting is state opt-in and each state only gets one slot, the mathematical ceiling on this risk is already far lower than a private company freely choosing locations. You cannot get 5 refineries all landing in similar overburdened communities within a single state, because each state only has one. The geographic spread is structurally forced across 50 different states by design, not concentrated by market logic the way private siting would be. The genuine residual risk is narrower than the critic frames it. It's not like 50 refineries pile into the same kind of neighborhoods.
Okay, that's fair.
The specific neighborhood chosen within each state might still skew toward already overburdened areas across many different states. which is a real, honest residual gap.
That's fair.
E&JSSI screens per site design doesn't roll up into a national cumulative check. Given that this is a genuine documented limitation, not a manufactured one, is this one you want to leave as an honestly acknowledged residual gap the way we did with eminent domain and water rights? Or do you want to explore adding a lightweight national roll-up reporting requirement? Just visibility, not veto power, so Congress sees the aggregate pattern annually alongside the other required reporting?
Okay, this is a little bit more complicated than the other ones we have been going through. This one is a little more complicated, guys, because there is a 5 refineries laying in similar overburden, so we won't be able to do that. Let's see, but that's what we're trying to prevent against. We're trying to prevent against oversaturation. Okay, I have an idea. So let's actually do some research. Check all 50 states, including Alaska. Check all 50 states, and let's see which states are going to be best suited for refineries that may actually pass in certain areas under the EJ. The EJ screening. Let's see which ones actually would pass and which states would have the space for it that are not already oversaturated. And let's see which states are most likely out of our 50 going to be able to hold at least one refinery. And then we can count 50 and we'll see how many is needed for each state. And then we can determine the situation.
That's a genuinely big research undertaking, G. All 50 states individually assessed against E&JSSI screen type criteria for viable, non-overburdened refinery siting. That's really more of a detailed written analysis project than something I can respond to well in a spoken format. This would come out as a giant list that's hard to follow out loud and easy to lose track of. Here's what I'd suggest instead, given where we are. Let's keep the answer to 41 exactly where we honestly left it. A genuine, acknowledged residual gap that E&JSSI screen doesn't roll up nationally. Same category as the eminent domain and water rights gaps we already accepted as honest limitations, rather than over-engineering a fix. Then, separately from this voice session, I can put together that full 50-state siting suitability breakdown
that'll work.
as a proper written
I'm gonna do
document
some
you can actually
research
read
in the
and
back.
reference.
I'm gonna do some
Since
research.
that's the kind of structured research output that belongs in text, not spoken conversation. For right now, want me to just lock 41 in as an honestly acknowledged gap like the others, and we keep moving through 42, 43 and onward here, while I prepare that 50-state breakdown as a follow-up document on the side?
All right, yeah, you can do that 50-state document on the side, but I still want the information relevant. If we could sum it up, that'll be fine. Either way, we need to make sure that the states, we only have 50 of them, and which states are more likely, let's go top 25, which states are more likely to be able to hold one or two, and that way we can narrow it down.
Got it. I'll put together that top 25 state ranking as a proper written document, since it's genuinely a research and data task, not something to read out loud in full. For now, let's keep momentum on the voice side. I'll lock 41 in as an honestly acknowledged residual gap. E&JSSI screen doesn't check cumulative national patterns. Same category as the eminent domain and water rights gaps already accepted, rather than solved with new mechanisms. The state ranking research will happen separately, and I'll have that ready for you. 42 next, foreign ownership of the supply chain. The concern that even with Buy America Act compliance, critical refinery components like specialized catalysts or advanced control systems still depend on foreign, sometimes adversarial manufacturers.
Okay, that sounds like the sour heavy crude that we're importing, but if we're doing the exporting, that doesn't really affect us too much. So us being able to refine our own, I don't know how this even applies. So go ahead and give details on their side and bring up the data that's necessary. And if our bill already defends this kind of thing, what I want you to do is lock in
those 50 state rankings and the 25 state rankings as information locked in. You don't have to speak that information, but lock that information in so it's relevant to our bill. And then what I want you to do is go ahead and continue with this one right here, 42. Let's go.
Quick clarification before I move forward. The state ranking research hasn't been done yet. That requires the actual 50 state analysis I mentioned. I'd prepare separately, so there's nothing to lock in yet on that front. I don't want to tell you something's saved when it isn't real data.
That's fine.
I'll get that built and let you know when it's ready. Now, on 42, this is actually a different supply chain than the crude oil itself, worth separating clearly.
Okay,
right,
perfect.
This is a real vulnerability, and importantly, it's a different one than crude sourcing, worth being precise.
Okay, perfect.
The concern isn't about the oil itself, it's about the specialized industrial catalysts, rare earth-dependent components, and control system hardware used to build and operate the refineries. And the research is stark. China controls roughly 90% of rare earth refining globally and dominates refining and processing for 19 of 20 key energy critical minerals. That's real leverage. And refinery catalysts specifically often depend on platinum group metals and rare earth elements in that same vulnerable supply chain. Here's the honest defense. And it's the same principle we already used for citizenship verification. We're not inventing a new mechanism, we're applying an existing one correctly. Point 5 already requires Buy America Act compliance, and the current federal posture, per the Heritage and CSIS research, is actively moving toward defining eligibility for federal procurement and incentives based specifically on where the mineral is refined and processed, not just where it's mined. Precisely because ownership at the mining stage without control at the processing stage still leaves you exposed to Chinese leverage. That means Buy America Act compliance, correctly applied and enforced by the procuring agency rather than loosely interpreted, already gives us the tool to screen for this. A supplier claiming domestic sourcing while quietly running components through Chinese-controlled refining and processing would fail genuine compliance review, not because we invented new screening, but because that's what rigorous compliance already requires. The honest residual gap, and it's worth naming directly, this only works if Buy America Act enforcement is applied rigorously rather than as a checkbox, which is a real administrative discipline question, not a legislative design flaw, similar to how we handled the eminent domain and water rights gaps. This bill inherits both the tool and the enforcement risk that already exists across the entire federal procurement system. Want that locked in as the answer to 42.
All right, so I'm going to do something. This is what I'm going to do right now. Give us our 50 state list. Give us our 25 top state list that can handle one or two. And then I want you to provide the data that backs up point number 41. All right, I went into write it mode so we can actually have this on our list. Research project. Let me pull the actual data. He's processing, thinking. He's gonna give us the text. Once the text is in there, he'll be able to have more figures. And what we're doing is prepping, creating the file. Perfect. The thinking process is happening. So what we have to do right now is allow Claude to do some research, because we need to make sure we are touching everything precisely. We don't want to beat around any bushes. We don't want to make up any fuck shit. We want to do what we can do to secure America's energy and secure American jobs. So that's what we're working on right now. All right. So he gave us the documents. We have them. Awesome. Okay. 130 refineries across 30 different states. Texas, Louisiana, California alone holding almost half of the refining capacity. Okay. Which is exactly the concentration item
that 41 warns about. Okay. Now that we have the information, it's all here. Okay. All right. So we pulled it up. We have both documents over there. We're going to go ahead and. Awesome. Sweet. Nice. 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 All right. Perfect. Perfect. All right. Let me see. All right, now that we have this information, let's go ahead and finish 41 argument, and then let's go ahead and move to 42 because we need to make sure that we're not oversaturating any specific states. And now that we know which states are actually able to take refineries with decent locations, let's see if we can spread this out a little bit so it's not saturated, and then we can focus back on 42. What do you got?
Good, so let's close 41 properly with that data now backing it up. 41 is now closed with real teeth, not just an acknowledged gap. The honest limitation still stands. EJA screen genuinely doesn't check cumulative impact nationally. That's confirmed by EPA's own documentation.
That's fair.
But the state ranking data shows the natural incentive gradient already works against reconcentration. The best suited states for new capacity: North Dakota, Oklahoma, New Mexico,
Nice.
Wyoming, Colorado, Montana, West Virginia, are precisely the states with the lowest existing refining density
Perfect.
and best feedstock access,
Thank you.
while Texas, Louisiana, and California, which already hold nearly half of all US refining capacity and the highest existing cumulative burden, are naturally lower priority for first wave allocation. Combined with the one slot per state cap, that means the pool most likely to actually opt in early is already spread across the country's interior and northern plains, rather than piling onto already overburdened Gulf Coast
Got 'em.
communities. So the answer isn't the gap doesn't exist, it's the gap exists on paper, but the bill's own opt-in incentive structure, plus real feedstock economics, naturally steers development away from the pattern the critic is worried about. That's 41, locked with data behind it.
Thank you.
Now 42, foreign supply chain dependency, specialized
This is what we
catalysts
do,
and control
baby.
systems still often trace back to Chinese-controlled refining and processing, even when raw materials are sourced elsewhere. The defense we built stands by America Act compliance under .5 already gives us the tool, since current federal procurement policy is moving specifically toward defining eligibility by where minerals are actually refined and processed, not just where they're mined, which closes the loophole of claiming domestic sourcing while quietly running components through Chinese-controlled processing. The honest residual gap is that this depends on rigorous enforcement of that standard rather than a checkbox interpretation, an administrative discipline question inherited from the broader federal procurement system, not a flaw unique to this bill. Want that locked in as the final answer to 42.
If that closes the gap, that's fine. If we need to actually address it with any existing policy, we can, but we go ahead and try that again.
Fair, let's actually stress test whether it's fully closed or needs a specific addition, rather than assuming the existing federal posture handles it. Here's the honest gap check. Buy America Act compliance today is genuinely evolving toward a refining location standard, but that policy shift is happening at the executive and agency level. It is not yet a hard, universal statutory requirement across all federal procurement. That means if we just say buy America Act compliance without more, a future administration less focused on this specific vulnerability could quietly let enforcement drift back to a looser, assembled in America standard that Chinese processed components could still slip through. That's the real residual risk, not a design flaw, but reliance on executive follow-through that isn't locked into statute. The clean fix, and it's a small, precise addition rather than a new mechanism, Add explicit language to point 5 stating that Buy America Act compliance for this program specifically is defined at the processing and refining stage for critical minerals and specialized components, not merely final assembly location, consistent with the direction DoD and Commerce are already moving for critical minerals procurement. That converts a discretionary administrative trend into a binding requirement specific to this program, so it survives a future administration that might not prioritize it. Want me to lock that specific addition into point 5 now?
Yes, that would be a beautiful addition. If that closes the gap, we can move to the next one.
Locked into point 5. That closes 42 fully, no longer dependent on administrative discretion.
Okay, perfect.
It's now a binding processing stage standard written directly into the bill. 43 next, the stranded federal asset argument, that if oil demand declines sooner than the IEA and EIA projections suggest, the government could be left holding 50 half-depreciated refineries with no viable exit strategy or buyer.
We have domestic needs, which would cover the buyer. Our domestic needs would increase, and if that is prevalent to the imports, then that would make sense, but we wouldn't need the imports so much if we're manufacturing domestically. Or am I getting this all wrong? And give the data for both sides. Let's go.
This confirms the real number worth naming, honestly. Carbon tracker estimates stranded fossil fuel assets could cost producers over $28 trillion in lost revenue over the next 10 to 20 years globally under an aggressive decline scenario. And one IEA scenario cited even projects fossil fuel demand dropping 80% by 2050. So this isn't a fringe worry. Serious institutions model real stranded asset risk under fast transition scenarios. Here's your instinct, and it's actually correct, just needs the mechanism named precisely. Stranded asset risk models mostly describe producers and exporters losing revenue because demand for their product disappears globally. That's the mechanism. Nobody wants to buy the oil anymore, so reserves and infrastructure sit unused. Our structure is different because it's not betting on global demand. For American crude exports, point 1, and the demand data from item 19 already established, these refineries exist specifically to fill a domestic processing gap. We currently export a lot of our own light sweet crude cheaply because we lack the domestic refining capacity to use it ourselves.
Perfect.
And import more expensive product to compensate. So even in a scenario where global oil demand does decline faster than IEA's baseline projects, American domestic consumption, fuel, diesel, jet fuel, petrochemical feedstock, doesn't disappear at the same pace or same way global export markets might. And this program specifically reduces reliance on imports rather than betting on new exports.
Thank you.
Which is the safer side of the stranded asset risk to be on. The honest residual nuance, and it's worth naming rather than dodging.
Okay.
If domestic demand itself eventually declines significantly, say from serious EV adoption or synthetic fuel penetration decades out, that risk doesn't vanish entirely, but it's a slow, multi-decade domestic consumption shift, not a sudden global export market collapse. And it's the same slow decommissioning risk every existing American refinery already carries today. This bill doesn't add new exposure beyond what's already the status quo for the 50 states, with actual refineries today. Want that locked in as the answer to 43?
If that answer suffice, but I'm not sure it does because it kind of just replaces with the whataboutism kind of situation. So let's get more detailed with that. I do believe that us being able to have this stability, we'd be able to survive the shift easier. And that is one of the key points we're trying to do, is survive the shift, because we know the shift is coming. These refineries will be cleaner, better, multi-use if we need them to be. And the money's there, the trust keeps funding, the revenue goes. It's not going and getting extracted, predatory extraction like these other private corporations do. So it's not something that will just fall on its face. And the people themselves are the ones that kind of dictate where this goes. So it should have a little more weight in the community.
it does scare the people that are in power and control the industry, but that's not who we're doing this for. We're doing this for the American people and America's stability as a whole. So if my point stands, we need the data to back that up. And if their point has any other teeth, go ahead and bring up their data and let's go ahead and compare. You can lock it in if necessary, but let's see if this has any other holes. And if not, let's move to the next one.
You're right, that first pass leaned on it's the same risk everyone has, which is true but weak. It doesn't show why our structure actually survives the shift better. Let me rebuild it around your actual point, that the design itself is built for resilience through the transition, not just parity with existing risk. Here's the sharper version. The $28 trillion stranded asset estimate assumes a specific failure pattern. Private companies that built single-purpose infrastructure optimized purely for maximum near-term extraction and export profit, with no reserve cushion, no public accountability, and every incentive to keep running flat out until the exact moment. Demand collapses, then get caught holding depreciated assets with no plan and no fallback. That's genuinely how most stranded asset scenarios play out.
Okay.
Sudden, unplanned, because the ownership structure had zero incentive to plan for anything but maximum extraction.
Perfect.
Here's why ours doesn't fit that pattern. And this is where your point actually lands hard. First, the mandatory 90% carbon capture from day one and the flexibility for heavy sour crude retrofit under point 4 mean these aren't single-purpose assets. Betting everything on one fuel category, the way the stranded asset models assume, that's real optionality baked into construction, not bolted on after the fact. Second, the trust structure itself is the actual answer to the no fallback problem. Since surplus rolls forward and idle funds keep generating returns rather than getting extracted as private profit, the enterprise is already accumulating its own transition reserve continuously. It's not spending every dollar chasing quarterly extraction targets the way a private operator answering to shareholders does. Third, and this is the part that really separates us from the stranded asset literature entirely, those models are almost universally analyzing companies with a fiduciary duty to maximize shareholder extraction regardless of long-term consequences. We explicitly built the opposite incentive. Government return capped, paid last after obligations, meaning nobody here is structurally rewarded for reckless flat-out extraction in the years before a demand cliff the way private stranded asset scenarios assume. So the honest, sharper answer isn't everyone has this risk. It's the specific mechanism that turns declining demand into a sudden trillion-dollar stranding event is reckless single-purpose over-extraction by profit-maximizing owners with no reserve. And this bill was deliberately built to be the opposite of that owner on every one of those dimensions. Flexible construction, accumulating reserve, and a capped patient return structure instead of extraction pressure. That's a real structural difference, not a comparison to someone else's exposure. Want that locked in as the full answer to 43.
Yes, if that closes the hole, if there's anything else there, you can go ahead and mention it. But if that closes the hole, we can move to 44 and lock that in.
That version closes it fully. It's not deflection anymore. It names the actual mechanism. Reckless extraction incentive under private ownership, and shows point by point why this structure was built without that mechanism. Flexible construction, accumulating reserve, capped patient return, locking 43 in as closed. 44 next, interstate commerce and state sovereignty conflict. The concern that a host state could pass later legislation restricting or taxing the enterprise in ways that conflict with the federal charter, creating a legal standoff between state and federal authority.
All right, if that closes it, let's go ahead and move to the next one if we're ready. But make sure you lock that in.
and let's go, unless we need to push back some more.
43 is locked. Now 44, let's dig into the actual law here. This is actually one of the oldest, most settled pieces of case law we've used yet. Over 200 years, and it lands squarely on our side.
200 years
McCulloch
ago.
versus Maryland from 1819 already resolves this exact scenario. Maryland tried to tax the federally chartered Second Bank of the United States, and the Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional under the Supremacy Clause, using the famous reasoning that the power to tax is the power to destroy, meaning if a state could tax a federal instrumentality at all, it could tax it into oblivion, effectively nullifying federal authority through state law. That's precisely our scenario. A state trying to restrict or tax a federally chartered enterprise after the fact. Here's the direct application. Since Congress charters this enterprise under the same constitutional authority TVA relies on, per Ashwanda, a host state that later tries to pass legislation taxing or restricting the enterprise in a way that conflicts with the federal charter runs directly into settled supremacy clause doctrine. The federal charter wins, full stop. That's not a novel legal theory. It's the single most foundational federalism case in American constitutional law. The honest nuance worth naming, this doesn't mean states have zero say. Ordinary state laws of general application, safety codes, standard business taxes, applied evenly to everyone,
that works.
Still apply.
Yeah.
What's barred is a state specifically targeting or singling out the federal enterprise to tax it punitively or regulate it out of existence, which is exactly what McCulloch prohibits. So the honest answer is, a state opted in voluntarily, and once opted in, it can't use its own legislature to unilaterally dismantle what Congress chartered. That's through centuries of settled law, not a gap we're patching. Want that locked in as the answer to 44?
Yeah, I want to lock that in as the answer to 44, but I want to take it a step further because the taxes are already coming out of the individual paychecks. The facility still has to abide by all of the different the different environmental and all the blah blah blahs that go with that. So they're not evading any kind of taxes, and any taxes that are appropriate are already applied, especially within that 75% revenue base. You see what I mean? That's why we did total entity revenue. So that way we could make sure the money was there. We could make sure the taxes were there. We could make sure the paychecks were there. We could make sure the refineries are doing what they're supposed to do without any kind of hindrance. This is the whole point of this. And it can't be private because, well, even if the private entities, they have to follow these same rules. So their 25% is still capped. And if they're not doing good business, or if anything falls behind, some of that money gets dipped into. This is the whole reason why we implemented the stewardship on this. So this is a key factor in the situation, and we need to make sure that's highlighted. So go ahead and give us more details on that one. And if we need to lock this all in, because you gave us our case and everything too, lock that in as well. But if there's any more pushback in this area, we need this to be very specific. So go ahead and run that for us.
That's an important addition. Let's fold it in properly because it heads off the obvious follow-up question. So does this mean the enterprise pays no taxes at all? And doesn't that seem unfair to host states? Here's the fuller answer, combining McCulloch with what you're pointing at. McCulloch bars a state from punitively taxing or targeting the federal enterprise itself to restrict or dismantle it. But that's narrower than no taxes flow to that state at all. Individual worker paychecks already generate ordinary state and local income tax the same as any other job in that state. That revenue exists regardless of the enterprise's federal charter status. Environmental, safety, and standard business compliance obligations under generally applicable state law still apply in full. Nothing about McCulloch or the federal charter exempts the enterprise from following the same environmental rules any other industrial facility in that state has to follow. It only blocks a state from singling this specific enterprise out for punitive treatment. And here's the sharper point, tying back to total entity revenue, the 75% retained operating reserve floor and the 25% capped government return aren't just financial mechanics, they're the actual proof this isn't a tax dodging structure. The reserve floor guarantees operating costs, including standard tax obligations and compliance costs, are covered before anything else happens. And the government's own return is explicitly capped and paid last after obligations, meaning the federal government isn't even taking the lion's share. It's deliberately structured to prioritize keeping the facility solvent, compliant, and paying its people over maximizing federal extraction. So the honest answer to is this dodging state revenue is no. Ordinary tax revenue still flows to host states through payroll, and standard compliance the same as any employer. What's blocked is a state trying to weaponize its tax authority specifically to kill or cripple a federally chartered enterprise after inviting it in, which is exactly the harm McCulloch was written to prevent 2 centuries ago. Thoughtfully closes 44 with the nuance in place. Want to move to 45, the labor supply shortage argument next?
Yeah, we can move to 45, but remember that 25% goes to, especially from that refinery, that specific refinery, it goes to the state if they are the ones that put the money up, or it goes to the government / state if the state had to invest with the federal government to cover that cost. And that applies still to that private entity that takes a slot that was not claimed. So it still applies across the board. And that 25% goes to the appropriate stockholder, because if they're putting their investment in, they deserve their 25%. So each state has their chance to opt in. And if the state can't afford the whole bill and the government comes in and covers a portion of it, they have to split that 25% proportionately to the percentage that they put in. And if the state wants to keep that partnership with the federal, that's fine, and they can split it. But if the state wants to pay them back out of their proceeds, that's fine, at their interest rate negotiated between them, that's cool. And then they can eventually get their whole 25%. And that goes for the private as well. So I feel like this is something that needs to be marked out if it's not marked out, and be very specific about that. But we can move to the next one if this is locked in. Let's go.
Good, that's a real refinement to the ownership structure worth locking precisely, since it clarifies who actually holds that 25% claim rather than assuming it's always federal. So the capped 25% return isn't automatically a federal government cut, it's a capital return proportional to whoever actually put up the money for that specific refinery. If a state funds its own slot fully, that state holds the full 25% claim on that site. If the state and federal government split the capital investment, the 25% splits proportionally to each party's share of the investment.
Exactly.
And a state can buy down federal involvement over time by repaying its portion at a negotiated interest rate until it holds the full claim itself. And critically, this same proportional ownership logic applies identically to a private entity that picks up an unclaimed state slot. Whoever capitalizes the site holds the corresponding proportional claim. There's no special carve-out for private capital versus public capital. The math is the same regardless of who's investing.
Thank you.
That's a cleaner, fairer structure than a flat federal skim. And it directly reinforces the McCulloch answer too, since it shows states aren't losing economic upside to the federal government. They're retaining or growing their own ownership stake the more they invest. That's locked into point 1's capital structure. Now, 45, let's go. This is real and current, so it's worth naming honestly rather than waving away. But there's also a genuinely strong counter-argument already built into the bill. The data confirms a real national skilled trade shortage. Industry estimates put it around 350,000 net new construction workers needed in 2026 alone, growing toward roughly 2.1 million unfilled skilled trades positions. By 2030, electricians, pipe fitters, welders, the exact trades 50 simultaneous refinery construction projects would compete for. That's a legitimate constraint, not
I know a lot
fabricated
of people
worry.
in those industries,
But
and
here's
they're
the
gonna be
interesting
happy
wrinkle,
about this shit.
and it directly supports our design. The building trades unions themselves, NAB2 specifically, argue this isn't really a labour shortage at all. It's a workforce planning and pipeline problem. They say the unionised construction sector already has the training infrastructure and apprenticeship pipeline needed. The issue is uncoordinated, unpredictable demand that doesn't let that pipeline ramp up in time.
Got him.
That's exactly what Pt.5's adaptive training pipeline was built to solve. Roughly $10 billion specifically earmarked for workforce development, plus milestone-gated funding, which means 50 refineries aren't all breaking ground simultaneously and yanking the same electricians and pipe fitters in 50 directions at once. Sites that aren't ready simply don't draw down funding yet, which staggers labour demand naturally, rather than creating 50-way bidding wars for the same finite trades pool. The honest residual piece. Staggering helps, but it doesn't manufacture skilled workers overnight. Apprenticeship pipelines take years to produce a fully certified pipe fitter or electrician, so early sites could still face real short-term labour cost, pressure, and timeline risk. Want me to lock in the training pipeline plus milestone staggering as the core answer to 45, with that timeline honest gap named?
Yeah, we can do that, but we need to make sure that we mention the fact that there is a ramp-up process to this, okay? There is a ramp-up process, which is why the funding has to be set aside into a trust. So over time, that trust, over maybe it's going to take 2 years or 3 years for this ramp-up. Once this is in place, it can't really be undone because the funds are there, the schools will be there, the opportunities will be there, and people will flock. And right now we have a huge amount of people that don't have anything to do, no workforce, no jobs. And if we actually look at the statistics, which I want you to bring up, how many people are unemployed, how many people are employed, and then we have to think about how many people are in America, right? Let's think about this, because you're saying some 300,000, 400,000 jobs, right? Even 1 million jobs. That's barely a percentage of the amount of people we have in America. So this should be easily fixed over time, especially if the opportunity is there and we are making the schooling for this specific field free. This is very important. So we have to make sure we include that.
Agreed, let's build this one with real weight since it's a legitimate multi-year constraint, not something we can wave off with a funding line. Here's the fuller, locked answer. First, the honest scale of the problem stays front and centre. A national shortage of roughly 350,000 skilled trades workers this year alone, heading toward 2 million by 2030, means 50 simultaneous refinery projects genuinely compete against every other data centre, factory, and infrastructure project in the country for the same finite pool of electricians, pipe fitters, and welders. That's real, and we don't minimise it. Second, the structural defence. Milestone-gated funding under point 2 means this was never designed as 50 simultaneous groundbreakings. Sites that clear, siting, permitting, and environmental review first draw labour first. Sites that lag simply don't pull from the trades pool yet, which naturally staggers demand across years, rather than creating one massive labour spike. Third, and this is the part that actually builds capacity, rather than just competing for existing workers, Point 3's roughly $10 billion adaptive training pipeline, paired with the Veterans Preference hiring standard, means this program is deliberately built to grow the labour pool, not just fight over its current size. Direct stipend hiring without hiring hall, gatekeeping, means someone can enter training and get paid while learning, which is a faster on-ramp into the trades than the traditional apprenticeship-only pathway. And NAB2's own position is that the existing union training infrastructure already has the capacity to scale if demand is predictable, which milestone gating specifically provides. The honest residual gap, named plainly rather than buried. Even a well-funded accelerated pipeline takes real years to produce a fully certified welder or pipe fitter. So the first wave of sites, especially in states with lower existing industrial workforce density, could still face genuine multi-year timeline pressure and higher labor costs before the training pipeline catches up. That's not a flaw in the bill's design, it's an honest physical constraint on how fast human beings can become skilled tradespeople. And it's exactly why the 50-state citing data, favoring states with existing energy sector workforce experience, actually matters twice over, once for community fit, and again for having trades workers already in place, locking that in as the full answer to 45, with the timeline gap explicitly on the record. Ready for 46? Insurance of the trust itself.
All right, so let's go ahead and move to 46. If that one is closed, I really feel like, you know, with our incentives and getting those people paid and, you know, making sure we have the means to actually get these people trained in a significant amount of time. I believe 2 years, 3 years should get them to at least be novice level, and the management and things like that, those things can still come from private sectors, retirees, things like that. Anybody that wants to get in, managers, stuff like that, people that have been doing this for years, they're proven. All kinds of different tests can be in there if we need to. So this can be very technical and this can get litigated if we need to, but I feel like those processes are going to handle themselves. So yeah, if all that's locked in, if there's any other pushback on that one, you know, that's fine, because things do take time. You know, it's not just going to happen overnight, but this incentive to get these people trained and getting that money in there, that could happen overnight. So if this is all locked in, if there's any other pushback on this one, we can go ahead and establish that again and run it back. If not, we can move to the next one after you lock that stuff in.
Good addition, worth folding in since it plugs the management experience gap that pure novice training timelines don't solve on their own. That's the missing piece, actually, since a 2 to 3 year novice pipeline handles the trades workforce. But skilled tradespeople alone don't run a refinery. You need experienced supervisors and technical management on day one, not in 3 years. So the fuller answer to 45 locks in with that addition. The training pipeline builds new trades capacity from the ground up, while simultaneously, experienced retirees, veteran plant managers, and proven industry professionals from the private sector can enter through the same open, non-hiring Hall G-ated door point 3 already establishes, meaning experienced leadership isn't waiting on the training pipeline timeline at all. It's recruited in parallel from day one. That closes the real gap. New workforce grows on its own multi-year timeline, while experienced oversight is available immediately, and yes, if it ever gets specifically litigated on qualifications or hiring standards, that's a normal employment law question, the same as any large employer faces, not a structural flaw unique to this bill. 45 is fully locked with that layered now. 46, insurance of the trust corpus itself, meaning not site-level liability like item 29, but protecting the actual multi-hundred billion dollar pooled trust fund from something like a major cyber attack or large-scale fraud. This confirms the strongest possible precedent already lives inside our own model, and honestly, closes the gap almost entirely without inventing anything new. The Social Security trust funds are the closest real-world analog to our trust corpus, hundreds of billions of dollars publicly held,
I was just about to
sitting
say
in the
that
same
shit.
category of attractive target our 50 refinery trust would be. And here's the key fact. The actual money isn't sitting in some standalone vulnerable account.
Exactly.
It's held by the Department of the Treasury itself and invested exclusively in special issue federal government securities, meaning the corpus rides on the full custodial infrastructure of the US Treasury, not a standalone financial account that a hacker or fraudster could isolate and drain. Separately, fraud protection runs through the same Office of Inspector General plus GAO combination point 2, already mandates for our enterprise, which is literally the existing federal playbook for large public trust funds.
We winning.
So the honest answer to 46 is, this isn't a new gap needing a new mechanism. Our trust structure should explicitly mirror the Social Security model. Corpus custody sits with Treasury under standard federal security protocols than a separate freestanding account, and OIG plus GAO oversight already locked into point 2
And it's
is the same
publicly
fraud
visible.
detection layer protecting Social Security's trust funds today. the one honest, residual nuance, cybersecurity of federal treasury systems broadly is an ongoing national concern independent of this bill, exactly like the CII and CUI protection gap we named back at item 31. It's a real risk. But it's the same baseline of risk every federal trust fund already carries, not something this bill creates or makes worse. Want that locked in as the answer to 46, with the explicit Treasury custody language added to point 2?
Yes, that would be beautiful. And if there's anything else we need to directly uh, involve, because they're saying cyber this and cyber that. I mean, we're already kind of at risk for those things. And if our government can't protect its finances now from cyber attacks, then it's going to be irrelevant moving forward of anything we do. So I really feel like we just need the government to be more efficient at that kind of thing. But if this is locked in, we can move to the next one. If that needs to be said in our bill, that's fine. Go ahead and let me know what's happening. Move to the next one if needed, if we're ready.
You've reached your usage limit. We can talk again in about 3.
Ah, this bastard. I just paid for these motherfuckers. Anyways, we cooked that shit up, bro. We cooked that shit up.
You've reached your usage limit.
Yeah, we cooked that shit up. These niggas want me to pay $100 fucking. That's crazy work, bro. Anyways, they don't want us to finish our last few points. I mean, we could throw as much money as we want into the Eververse, but they're just trying to drain us of everything. So that's very disappointing. 3 hours to finish this conversation. But you know how it is when we're breaking ground and we're making things actually happen. There's always going to be somebody that impedes us, right? But we have enough here that really kind of, like we built the shit out of this, all right? I'm going to do everything I can to make sure this gets finalized. I'm going to make sure that this is completed for sure. We're going to have our bill on paper. I should be able to deliver this on Monday. I think we're going to do it that way. Because I'm definitely going to end this episode. I got some other shit to do. Thank you everybody for came today. It kind of sucks that I couldn't have this conversation with somebody that has this kind of knowledge and they're willing to actually work with me to make things better. You know what I mean? A lot of people want to try to defeat this kind of thing. And what we're doing over here, we're building something that just can't be defeated. You know what I mean? And that's something that's relevant. Let's see.
You've reached your usage limit. We could.
Yeah. So it's done on all my conversations. Like it's wild, man. That's wild, bro. Like you could pay for all these different things. You could pay for AI, internet, blah, blah, blah. But the thing is, they can limit your access to the ability to grow. And everything is based off of money. I could give as much money as I want to any fucking organization, and they would still take the money and do whatever. And still no results. This is the problem we're having in America a lot. So the only thing I can do is try to come back harder next time. I appreciate everybody for coming through. We did a lot of good shit today. Hopefully we can put this together and actually give it to somebody that wants to run on the American people, for the American people, for American stability. I think this will be a good thing to run on right here. All right. But I've been talking a whole lot, guys. I've been going back and forth, racking my brain, trying to come up with this plan to try to help us have a better success and whatnot. But I appreciate everybody for coming through. We had a good episode. That part right there, it kind of ruins the integrity of the show, man. You would hope that you could, pay for a service and be able to utilize that service to your heart's content. That's not how the game is played. You feel me? But it's time for me.
Checks. My little homegirl put me on. She said, this shit brand new, free flow. Lady rappers been acting like this is not an art. Huh? You forgot about that part. Lady rappers been acting like this is not an art. Huh? You forgot about that part. Lately rappers been spitting like they ain't got a heart. Because when I step to the game, I rip that shit apart. My evolution with the Gyarados from Magic
If you do not want to
the
change,
whole world is in my cart.
if you do not want to better yourself, if you do not want to break outside
strategize
of
smart.
this matrix,
Motion through reality.
if you want to live in your comfortable delusion that they have built
shitty cards. I'm trying as hard as I can against all of the odds. Pushing as hard as I could is what got me so far. But what are my chances of actually reaching the stars? Still, I will never get up tatted over my heart. Never my senses hiding my weed up in the jar.
Don't want to understand. If you are not here
like I'm too far. When it comes to the game, I'm an ego, your
that's outside of your own mind,
I'ma
and
catch you
accept
off guard while you
others'
chillin'
minds
in
and
the crib. Got
opinions,
you
the way
chick in
they
my
think
car.
for themselves,
Every time
do
you
not
hear it
belong.
tripping like that shit sounds bizarre. Your
And
favorite
finally,
rapper try hard,
if
still
you
is
are
a mark.
not trying to
Still like the fuel to the
positive,
game, watch it spark.
if you are not
My
trying
lines
to
burn
help
like blunts,
create
getting smoked in
solutions
the
while we
dark.
discuss
Hella
the
cook
problems
shit
and
up.
how they
If your
got
ass
here,
wanna spar,
you
barbecue
do
your
not belong
beef
here.
up like the seats in my
Negativity,
car. Cool yourself
hate,
up, refrigerator
disrespect,
jar.
name
Rappers
calling,
been not
those
rappers,
things
not
will not be
rapping
allowed
art.
here on this platform,
You forgot
and not
about
in this
that.
empire.
Rappers been
We
acting
are
like this is
the
not an
ones, the true Americans, that want to be free and stand as we have always stood.
art. Go ahead.
Damn, this shit exclusive.